So yeah, I think there was an opportunity there to like just retort and just say, well, hey, actually, if you subgroup analyze these meta-analyses this way, which is the way that you'd want to subgroup analyze them if you wanted to like investigate whether or not the effects that we're seeing in the randomized controlled trials are consistent with effects that we see in the epidemiology. This is the way you'd want to subgroup them. And when you do that, you see the increase in risk. So yeah, that's like that's the first thing. The second thing was a little bit later.
Well, just with regards to that,
yeah, for sure.
You know, well, I watched your videos about Bart. You know, I essentially said I'm not going to bring any studies because I'm not going to go by the stupid 3 studies rule.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that rule actually makes no sense. Like, it actually literally doesn't make any sense.
And so that's his first line of defense. On top of that, he has his, as soon as he talks, I get muted. I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you noticed that, but as soon as he says anything, my mic cuts out. So through the whole debate, I'm just kind of sitting there patiently. And he was really using that to his advantage, like by interrupting a lot. So, there
was something else. Oh, sorry, go on.
I 100% agree. There was like infinite opportunities to do better, but you know, it was so stacked in his favor.
So later on, there was actually a really good instance to just straight up pin him when he was talking about the relative risk of lung cancer from smoking compared to the relative risk of anything in nutritional epidemiology. That was a good opportunity to just pin him because only an idiot would say something like that. And the reason for that is there are some diseases that are investigated in nutritional epidemiology that would produce relative risks, and approaching the relative risk, they would produce certain relative risks, certain maximum relative risks, and it would be mathematically impossible for them to produce relative risks anywhere even close to cigarettes or like lung cancer from smoking. So he's wrong about the relative risk of lung cancer from smoking. He said it was like 11.5 or something like that, which is a pretty big relative risk.
He said it was 11,000.
Oh yeah, well 11. So 11,000%. 11,000% would be like I believe like 10 times or something like that.
Did you watch that part of the debate? Because he interrupted me constantly throughout that part, and he actually forced me off that topic in the end. And literally, there's people in his audience commenting like, "Haha, he thinks 11,000 is smaller than 10 or whatever." And like, yeah, he literally didn't even let me get my point across in the end because he just forced me to start talking about a different topic after that.
Yeah.
And you could see I was trying to say stuff like for the last 2 minutes of that section of the conversation, and he kept interrupting.
So like what I would say to him in that case is just straight up ask him, is like, okay, what endpoints are you talking about? Because lung cancer is not typically an endpoint that's really investigated in nutritional epidemiology too much, because we don't expect diet-disease relationships to be like involving lung cancer. So it's not really actually something that comes up a lot in nutritional epidemiology. It comes up occasionally when you're investigating things like cooking methods, like kitchen fumes and stuff like that. Like lung cancer discussions will come up. Other than that, like I don't know what the hell he's talking about, because say you find an increase in the relative risk of coronary heart disease, and there's like a 10% prevalence of it in the cohort. Well, that's going to cap the relative risk truncate the maximum possible relative risk much lower than what even he said was the relative risk of lung cancer from smoking. It's just not mathematically possible to get to that level of relative risk with certain diseases, because the relative risk is going to be truncated based on the prevalence of the disease in the population that you're studying. So a 1% prevalence is going to produce or going to allow for much higher relative risks than a 10% prevalence, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
and I can actually,
this actually was the point that I was saying. I just I understand you're probably wording it better than I could have, but at the same time, in the context of that debate, I had like less than a sentence at a time to talk. So
yeah.
So what he did was he interrupted me.
Sorry.
He interrupted me as I was explaining that you can't just compare two relative risks and see which one's bigger. And he interrupted me while I was making that point and said, "Well, it is bigger, look." And then all his supporters don't know shit, and they're just like, "Oh, look at that dumb vegan."
Well, yeah. I mean, like, that's just begging the question.
Yeah.
It's like one is more credible because the relative risk is bigger, and you can tell it's more credible because the relative risk is bigger. It's like, well, that's just begging the question, right? So in the VC text, I actually just put an image. It's a table with 3 columns. You have the prevalence of the disease in one column, the example of the equation to produce the relative risk in the middle column, and then on the rightmost column, you have the maximum possible relative risk at a given prevalence of a certain disease. And you can see how, like, in the case of lung cancer, the prevalence is about 1%, and that produces a maximum possible relative risk of 100. Whereas with cardiovascular disease, you're often looking at 10 to 30%, which creates a relative risk of 3.33 to 10. You can't even get to the same relative risks that you can with smoking and lung cancer. Like, it's not mathematically possible. So I think it you could have pinned Bart, like, on the spot right there by him affirming something that wasn't mathematically even possible. He makes a bunch of mistakes like this.
Where do I get that image you just mentioned?
Oh, I produced this, so that image that's the image.
I don't know how to find it.
It's in the VC text. So there's a channel along the side called VC text.
Oh yeah, I think I got it. Yeah.
Let me give you the file here. I believe that's the PDF.
Sorry, but did you debate Bart K, or do you want to debate Bart K? I heard something like that. Or why you mentioned Bart? Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. So Vegan Bazooka debated Bart K. And,
what?
And, I mean, yeah. And as much as it pains me to say, I actually think that Bart won the debate. But that does not mean that Bart won the debate. Like you can win a debate with bullshit if your interlocutor isn't able or doesn't know, like, why what was said was bullshit. You could win a debate with bullshit. This has happened before. One of my friends, Alan Flanagan, lost a debate to a guy named Tucker Goodrich because he was not able or not willing to kind of appreciate what Tucker was saying, or like what Tucker was saying was bullshit. So I did a reaction to that debate, and I was pointing out, like, listen, Tucker won the debate, but he won the debate with bullshit. And I even though you can win a debate with bullshit, I wouldn't take it as a reflection of your competence. I wouldn't take it as a reflection of Bart's competence. So don't take it the wrong way when I say that Bart probably won the debate.
I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, for starters, it wasn't really a fair debate because I would be muted as soon as he talked.
It sounds like it was pretty sad.
Lol.
I would say
Okay.
he was wrong on every empirical point. I think I won, but you know, he just does this thing where he's like, you don't know the first thing, you're out of your depth, you're embarrassing yourself. You know, he just does that the whole time.
Yeah, that's one of the tactics that he uses, and it wouldn't fly with me if we were in a debate. I think this is actually going to get into the next thing that I wanted to discuss. Is that like one thing is just a point of principle. Like, so the first thing that I wanted to discuss was that, like, I watched some of the content on the rest of your channel, and so if a carnist is making a true proposition, it's probably not a good idea to challenge that proposition if it's true, because it'll make you look bad, right? So
Example?
if a carnist says something like cheese is healthy, or if a carnist says something like fish is healthy, those two propositions are true. Those are health promoting foods, right? Now,
I don't agree with that, but sure.
Yeah, I know you don't agree with it, but like, we can get into why I think that those are true propositions. So I take fish to be healthy. I take most dairy other than butter to be largely healthy. There are a bunch of animal foods that I would consider to be health promoting. So like, if you're in a debate and a carnist says a true proposition like that, and you disagree with it, you're already at a disadvantage if it can be empirically demonstrated that the position's false. So like, what I'm trying to safeguard you against is getting into the trap of assuming that just because you take the vegan position, that entails that you must be against all propositions that a carnist might throw at you, like cheese is healthy or fish is healthy. The approach that I take is to just say, yeah, I agree with that proposition, and there's no disagreement between us. There's no disagreement between us there. However, I don't take it that just because those foods are healthy, that means that they're ethical to consume. That's the position that I would take. And also, I think if vegans are denying the health value of certain animal foods, they're actually shortchanging themselves. Severely
I have
shortchanging
a giant folder of the health risks of fish and cheese. Like that's no question to me. Like, I don't know what you're referencing here.
Oh, I mean, yeah. So, like, my inference is coming from, say, the highest tiers of the evidence hierarchy, meta-analyses of prospective cohort studies, meta-analyses of even randomized controlled trials looking at constituents that exist within fish that could explain some of the health benefits. Yeah, so the thing is that, like, I don't think it's deniable that fish is healthy. Like, to no greater or lesser degree than any plant food that you could make an argument for. Like, the data is...
This is insane to me. Like, dude, the heavy metals.
Yeah. Like, I can explain the heavy metals thing. The heavy metals thing is literally just mechanistic speculation about what ought to happen based on some appraisal of the constituents of the foods. Like, okay, so it has heavy metals in it, therefore, if you consume it, it's going to be detrimental. That's just false. Like, it could be that despite the heavy metals, there are such benefits of fish that it just straight up outweighs any risk of the heavy metals. That the benefits of fish that are just so profound that the risks of the heavy metals are just straight up they're just straight up trumped. I'm never
gonna agree. So.
Well, no. You know, like, my rebuttal to the fish thing is that even if I grant you that heavy metals are bad, it still would be the case that fish are inversely associated with all sorts of different disease outcomes, and they exist closer to the health promoting side of the spectrum than the health detracting side of the spectrum. And I don't think that can be persuasively argued against based on the human outcome data that we have available. This is the point that I'm trying to make, is that if a carnist was to make such an argument to you, I don't think you would get very far on mechanistic speculation. So I think it would actually be more helpful to your position. It would be more helpful for debates going into the future to just acknowledge when animal foods have benefits. Because to affirm the opposite when the fact is clearly, like, when it's clearly true, it doesn't serve you, right? So I would love to say, oh, animal foods have no benefits because I'm personally vegan. I would love to take that position. It's just not a true position. It's just not a correct position to take. And I believe that vegans who take that position are shortchanging themselves and shortchanging other vegans.
And also, I want to add, just because a food is healthy, it doesn't mean you can't get as an individual as healthy with fish without fish. So I mean with that, you don't need fish to get the same health effects, but fish is health promoting. Yeah. So sorry for my bad English, but I hope I get the point across.
So the data would seem to suggest that fish and legumes appear to be roughly in the same territory in terms of risk reduction. So that's my position on fish. So my advice would be to, like, really look at the literature. Like, if you're going to get into empirical debate, you have to respect the evidence hierarchy. You have to look at the literature with humility and just say, like, okay, yeah, cheese is health promoting. That's unequivocally the case based on the human outcome data. Fish is health promoting. That's unequivocally the case based on the human outcome data. And you can actually just take those and accept them, and it doesn't interact with the vegan position at all. Like, because the vegan position is a position about rights. So you don't need to just, like, accept that all animal foods are detrimental. Like, that just seems like a non sequitur to me, and it seems like poor reasoning to me. And I'm not saying this as a dig to you. I'm literally trying to improve the quality of your debates going into the future by highlighting ways in which I think there's room for improvement. For example, I'll actually give you a really good example. So when carnists say to me that red meat is healthy because we evolved consuming it and we're heavily adapted to consuming meat, or red meat in particular, I just grant it to them. I say, yeah, the human body is actually very heavily adapted to consume meat. It's very obviously the case. We have all sorts of adaptations to meat consumption. You know, we have, like, our teeth are a certain shape. Our stomach pH, our stomach acid pH is below a certain threshold. We have shorter guts. So that puts us at least on the omnivore side of the spectrum, more than likely. We have regulated heme iron uptake in the gut. We have regulated B12 uptake in the gut. We have all of these different adaptations. We have immunological adaptations to new 5GC. So we produce antibodies to this thing that's only found in red meat. So we're totally adapted to consume red meat. And what I do is I go two different directions with that. A, it has nothing to do with veganism. And B, even if I was to grant you that we are heavily adapted to consume meat, that's actually a reason to be suspicious of meat, because things to which we are most strongly adapted have the highest probability of being antagonistically pleiotropic, which means that it actually could explain why meat is detrimental for us in the long term, like why red meat is detrimental for us in the long term. So the way I go about debating these people is to just grant them as much as possible and then explain to them why it's not interacting with my position. Because they'll say things like, oh, veganism is bad because we're adapted to meat. Well, okay, I grant you that we're adapted to meat. So I'm accepting P2 and I'm rejecting P1. Like, why is it entailed that veganism is bad because we're adapted to meat, for example?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I just have a different approach to debating these people.
I don't have a problem with, like, specific claims with regards to the whatever study's been referenced, but to say that red meat is healthy or that fish or cheese is healthy, that to me is a stretch.
Well, this is actually this will segue nicely into the next thing that I wanted to talk about with regards to debate. Is very often people will get into empirical debates, and they will get into this weird trap in empirical debates where they're treating studies like cards in a Magic the Gathering deck, right? Where it's like you put your card on the table, you put your study on the table and it poses some problem for my position. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to counter this card with some counter study. And then this goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. When really, one of the things that's not even clear as an onlooker to most of these debates, one thing that's not even clear is that these people have shared meanings of the fucking terms that they're using. So, like, when I say that cheese is healthy, I might not actually be meaning the same thing by health as you, right? And once we clear up the semantics, it may actually be the case that there is no disagreement between us, and that the disagreement only exists with regards to the different usages of the word, right? Mm-hmm. So if you go into the VC text, imagine a carnist gives you this proposition. Red meat is perfectly healthy, right? Say a carnist gives you that proposition. Sorry. Now, immediately, there is tons of stuff in that proposition, right? Like, it's only 4 words, but there's tons of stuff in that proposition that is simply unclear to me, right? Like, going straight into it, super, super fucking unclear, right? Like, what is meant by red meat? Because oftentimes when you talk to these people, when they say red meat, all they're referring to is beef, right? So you could actually just replace it with beef. So then it becomes beef is perfectly healthy to eat. Or if by red meat they also mean like goat and lamb or something like that, then it would be beef, goat, and lamb is perfectly healthy to eat, right? So as you tease apart the semantics of what they're saying, perhaps you get to a point where there isn't even a point of disagreement. So, for example, they say, is perfectly healthy. Like, what is meant by perfectly? Does that mean that the consumption of beef, goat, and lamb entails no downsides, for example? If that's what's meant by perfectly, then that would certainly be a point of disagreement. But if you ask them, well, what the hell do you mean by healthy? And they unpack it in such a way that it just sounds like it just accords with my values or something like that, then I'm going to agree with the proposition, right? So beef, goat, and lamb is, say, has no downsides based on my values. Well, then I don't disagree. Fine, take it. I don't care, right? Because it's just, all they're saying is that they feel a certain way. And I don't disagree with that, right? But if I was to use my definitions here, there would be a point of disagreement. But I think it's actually really valuable to press people on what the hell they mean before even getting into the empirical debate. Like, I'll give you an example. I had a debate very recently where somebody defined the word healthy as not leading to inflammation. And clearly, like, what's entailed from that is that a food that doesn't increase inflammation but also instantly kills you is technically healthy on that definition. So I certainly didn't agree with the definition, but if they can give me an example of a food that doesn't increase inflammation, I would agree that that's healthy by that definition, right? So it just, like, semantic analysis, like, prior to a debate even happening is so critically important, and it goes overlooked. And there are so many debates that don't even need to happen because once you clear up the semantics, there often isn't even a disagreement. I had another debate where I actually went back and forth with the guy for about 20 minutes before I realized, wait a second, something's weird about the way he's using terms. I thought we had a shared understanding of these terms. Turns out we actually didn't. So I just asked him, it's like, what do you mean by this word? And he just cashed it out into something like, it accords with my values. And I was like, okay, like, then we don't need to debate because I agree with that, right? Like, this, that, and the next thing accords with your values. Sure, that's just trivially true, and I can grant that, and then we don't even need to have a debate about it. So, for example, when I say cheese is healthy, you could ask me what I mean by healthy, and what I mean by healthy is increasing. What I mean by healthy is increasing the lag time to illness, right? So by increasing the lag time to, like, by using that definition, all sorts of things are going to be seen as either healthy or unhealthy, existing on closer to one side of the spectrum of either health promotion or health detraction or another, right? So red meat would be unhealthy on my view because it shortens the lag time to disease onset or illness onset based on the human outcome data. But cheese would be healthy because it lengthens the onset to illness based on by my definition. So I don't know if there would still be a disagreement between you and I about whether or not cheese is healthy. But
I would disagree with it as a message. Like there's, when you're talking publicly, there's going to be people interpreting it. So I would strongly disagree that cheese is healthy under any circumstance. But I would agree with the statement where you clarified what you mean.
Well, wait. So you would disagree that cheese is healthy under any circumstance? So
well, if you're promoting the message that cheese is healthy, then yeah, of course I disagree.
Well, wait. What's wrong with promoting that message?
Well, I mean, well, it's just like there's nothing good about cheese that I can tell.
Well, that's just begging the question, though. What I want to know is, like, why is it bad to promote the message that cheese is healthy?
Well, I just can't think of any nutritional value you could possibly be getting from it.
Oh, I mean, like, there's tons. You could be getting protein, you could be getting calcium, you could be getting all sorts of nutrients that are in cheese. Butyrate, I mean,
saturated fat.
In cheese, I think. Pardon?
Saturated fat.
Yeah, true. And saturated fat has health value.
I don't know, man. I appreciate what you're saying, but
here's the thing. If a substance qualifies as a food, it's health promoting by definition, and this is something that needs to be appreciated. So,
see, I don't even know if it would meet my definition of food.
Well, then if you're using a proprietary definition of food, then I might not agree. I might not disagree with you when you say that cheese is unhealthy or cheese is not food if what you mean by food is, it's a substance that accords with my values. I'm not going to disagree with that, right?
Right.
But if you say cheese is unhealthy because it has demonstrable negative effects on human health, that I would contest.
Well, okay. Well, I would just say, what do you even mean by cheese? Because most cheese that's coming to my mind is like absolutely disgusting, indefensible, like loaded with salt. Like it's just, Yeah.
So cheese in the literature is defined usually in one of two ways, sometimes three ways. You have soft cheeses like brie and even processed cheese, and then you have hard cheeses like Asiago or Parmesan or any of those sorts of cheeses. Usually they're bifurcated or even trifurcated into three different domains. Of the hard cheeses, for example, I find very little negative to say in terms of health value.
Okay, so well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
If you ate a pizza loaded with mozzarella, do you think that's doing you good? Like the cheese itself?
Do I think it's doing me good? Yes.
Oh man!
Now. Here's why semantic analysis is actually really, really important. Because if by good you mean that it's doing you no better than any substitution, then I would disagree with that. But if by good you just mean that it's conferring some health benefit, then I would agree.
What was the first part of that you wouldn't agree?
Yeah, so I wouldn't agree. I wouldn't agree that eating the pizza would be say favorable compared to or say doing something good for me. If you said, is the pizza doing something good for you? If by good you mean that it would be contributing to my health no better or no worse than any substitution, I would disagree with that. So I think lentils are probably better than pizza, right? But if by good you mean that it's conferring some kind of benefit to me, like I'm getting calcium, I'm getting protein, I'm getting energy to run my metabolism, all of those things seem good to me. So I'm going to agree. I'm going to agree that that eating pizza would seem good on those grounds, that it has some kind of benefit. So this is why semantic analysis is just so important.
But
because we need to clearly understand each other's words, right?
If you would argue that the cheese is healthful because you're getting calcium, isn't that the same level of mechanism to where I could say, well, what about the casomorphin, or what about the saturated fat, or what about the salt,
Well, you see, the thing is that my view captures those things. Those things are captured in my view. Now, to the extent to which those things are health detracting, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that the food is without benefit. All foods are a mixed bag of opportunity costs and risks and benefits. I even think that extends to plant foods. I have a very unique view on what healthy food should be. But if what's meant by so is there any good that can be conferred by consuming cheese? The answer is yes. Is there any bad that can be conferred by consuming cheese? The answer to that's also yes. Those are compatible.
Sure. I just it's like I don't disagree, but if you're I would just never send a message to anyone that it's okay to eat cheese, or that cheese is food, or that
That's a normative claim. That's a normative claim. That's not an empirical claim. For the normative claim, I would say no, you don't eat cheese because it's unethical and horrible.
I just wouldn't assume my audience would know the difference.
Yeah, so that's why you just clarify, right? So I would say something to the tune of, I accept that cheese has health value, and to the extent that it has health value that would be useful to incorporate into a vegan diet, I think vegans should probably work toward understanding what those health benefits are so that they can incorporate those health benefits into a vegan diet. But I do not condone the consumption of the purchasing of cheese, because I do not believe those things are currently able to be ethically procured.
Well, okay.
Now, I would go about it.
Well, I don't know, it's just a weird line of reasoning to me, because by that logic, I would just say all animal products are health promoting, because if you're starving to death, they'll actually stop you from starving to death.
Yeah, correct. That's compatible with my view. I think all foods are health promoting, but they exist on a spectrum of minimally to maximally health promoting. It just so happens that a lot of animal foods exist on the minimally health promoting side of the spectrum, but a few animal foods actually do exist on the maximally health promoting side of the spectrum, alongside a lot of different plant foods as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I just think it's a dangerous message to say oh yeah, all animal products are healthy.
Right. No, I understand. As an ethical vegan, there are kind of there's an opportunity for normalizing the practice of animal foods by saying that they're healthy. And that's where the clarification comes in. I say, while I agree and while I acknowledge the health benefits of these foods, I can't condone their consumption. But I think people should probably work toward understanding what those health benefits are so they can be ethically incorporated into vegan diets. For example, we're now starting to kind of bioengineer in a sort of way dairy that is being produced from like cyanobacteria instead of actually being produced by cows. So like the milk, the milk proteins are actually being synthesized by bacteria now, and certain companies are actually producing ethical whey protein, and I think that's great. I think if that's a viable if that's a viable option for people who want to get more protein, and I think it could be even life-saving for some individuals within the population, I think that's great. I don't see any ethical problem with that at all. But yeah, I think by not acknowledging the benefits of animal foods, or at least certain animal foods, vegans are kind of shooting themselves in the foot. Like, because say there was some compound found in some animal food that was not going to be ethical to procure, but did confer some kind of health benefit that would improve people's quality of life, that would improve people's longevity and health status, and things like that. Now, it may not be ethical to procure, but understanding how that compound in that animal food could be conferring that benefit would be important, because maybe there would be a way to procure that compound in an ethical way. Like, say, creatine, for example. Maybe creatine has all sorts of benefits, which I actually think it does. And right now, a really, really unethical way to procure creatine is to, slit cows' throats, chop them up into little pieces and eat them. That's one way to get creatine. I don't agree with that way of getting creatine. I think that's horrible. But if we could synthesize creatine and give it to people without the horror and without the ethical implications, I think that's awesome, right? I think if somebody was to imply that, say, I know you're not doing this, but let's say if somebody implies that creatine can't possibly have any benefits because it comes from an animal food, and they're doing this because they're sort of ideologically committed to all animal foods being bad because they think veganism is, the bee's knees or whatever, I think they're shortchanging the rest of vegans and all of the vegans that they're persuading to their view. Like, I don't agree ethically with that approach to veganism. Just to let you know, like, where I'm coming from here.
Well, I mean, is there any evidence that people with lower levels of creatine are somehow disadvantaged?
Well, no, I was just using it as like a hypothetical, but I mean, there is some evidence that supplementing creatine even beyond what you'd be able to get from animal foods does have benefits. Oh yeah, like the sports performance benefits are actually like pretty astounding. When you get like between 3 to 5 grams of creatine a day, you increase there are measurable increases in lean body mass. There's measurable increases in strength, endurance, performance.
Oh, that's fine.
There's even some evidence. Yeah. And there's some evidence that even it could have implications for certain types of depression. So, I mean, I'm just using it as an example, and I'm not really like prepared at this moment to defend like a particular compound. I'm just discussing a principle here. So, in principle, I don't necessarily think that I just don't think it serves veganism to be. I know you're not doing this, but because I believe that you're genuine when you say that you don't believe that like cheese or fish are healthy or whatever. But when some vegans really do take a dishonest approach here, and to the extent that they are, I think it just doesn't do veganism any favors, because it honestly just makes us look bad.
Right. I mean, the thing is, I see what you're saying, and I'm aware of the your outcome-based data that you're referencing. I just have so many. What I guess you could just hand wave it all as mechanistic speculation, but or like associating the cheese or the fish with salt or the heavy metals or blah blah blah. But at some point it's like, well, is it really just mechanistic speculation? Like,
well, so in terms of the evidence hierarchy, we have a hierarchy of evidence, and mechanistic speculation, kind of expert opinion, exists at the very bottom. And then we have, closer to the top, we have things like prospective cohort studies and randomized controlled trials. I'm not personally aware of any randomized controlled trials for cheese that have hard endpoints, so immediately we're kind of relegated to just discussing the prospective cohort studies on the subject. And they seem to be in pretty uniform agreement that cheese, particularly hard cheese, confers benefits for human health, irrespective of the saturated fat content. And that probably has to do with effects of the food matrix and dairy in particular, that there's a blood lipid blunting effect of dairy that is still kind of unknown, or the mechanisms behind that are kind of elusive. But it seems like dairy that hasn't been churned, dairy that hasn't been homogenized, seems to have a lipid, an effect of blunting the rise in blood lipids that you'd expect based on the saturated fat that's in there. So that could also help to explain why there is an inverse association between cheese and cardiovascular disease despite the saturated fat. I would just the outcome data for me is very, very, very persuasive that most dairy foods, except for butter and homogenized dairy, seem to be largely health promoting, and low fat dairy also seems to be largely health promoting. Meaning that, and by my definition, that just means that it exists closer to the maximally health promoting side of the spectrum than the minimally health promoting side of the spectrum. I wouldn't put cheese and red meat in the same category just because they're animal foods. That's another way I could put it.
Sure. Yeah.
And I know you said earlier that you don't even think they qualify as foods, but I imagine that's just kind of like a normative thing. That's not necessarily that's not necessarily applying the standard definition of a food. I think you would agree that cheese conforms to the standard dictionary definition of a food. It's just you might not think of it as food because when you look at it, you might be reminded of the horrors of what it took to get it. And I totally understand that. And that's totally fine.
Well, I mean, if the negative health impact outweighs the positive health impact, I start to question whether it would even fit the dictionary definition. I could be wrong, but I don't know that. I try not to make ethical arguments because I know at the end of the day, if you can make all the ethical arguments you want, but if someone believes it's healthy, that they're not going to care as much.
Maybe. I actually have different intuitions there. I think if you can't make a persuasive ethical argument for the consumption of something, I think people are going to be largely kind of apathetic to the health implications, right? Because you have a vegan sitting across from you in this conversation who acknowledges health benefits of animal foods and also takes the position that they're unethical to eat and doesn't eat them for those reasons. I mean, I eat some animal foods, and we could get into that, but that's neither here nor there. I'd still call myself a vegan. So I have different intuitions about it. I think that if you were to demonstrate to somebody that eating something was no different than directly benefiting from a Holocaust, they're not going to care if it's healthy. If they literally believe in their mind that a Holocaust produced it, I don't think that they're going to find it persuasive to eat it on the basis of health, unless there's something psychologically wrong with them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's just that of the people I've had debates with so far, I think making ethical arguments is just basically just going to get you laughed at. And, I understand the ethical arguments and I agree with all of them, but when you're talking to a carnivore who believes meat is the healthiest food in the world, even if you convince them it was unethical, I think they would still justify it for the health reason.
May I can interject? You can maybe make the same argument for, okay, let's assume that dairy was unhealthy, fish was unhealthy. Would that really stop the people from eating it? Like we know cigarettes is unhealthy, ultra-processed food often are unhealthy when we talk about junk food. So, and the people still do it because, okay, maybe the taste is enough, or maybe the pleasure is enough. Like I drink alcohol sometimes at the weekend, I smoke shisha sometimes, and I know shisha increases my lung cancer risk, but I do it anyway because,
yeah, like same here. Like I drink alcohol on occasion, I smoke weed on occasion, I do all sorts of things that are unhealthy for me because they provide some type of benefit to my psychology somehow, either through like taste pleasure, social pleasure, or the enjoying the feeling of an altered state. There are all sorts of reasons that go into why we do X, Y, and Z. But yeah, I guess we probably just have different intuitions about whether or not people would choose to give up animal foods, even if they were healthy or weren't healthy. I think the ethical argument is often sufficient. When you're talking to a carnivore, though, when you're talking to somebody that you know you're not going to change their mind about, like Bart K has built a platform for himself that's built upon a certain worldview. I would not be going into a debate with Bart, for example, expecting that I would change his mind on anything. My goal in a debate with Bart would be to get him to bite as many hilarious bullets as possible and get him to look like my objective in that debate would be to make him look like a clown to the greatest extent that I could in order to try to sway his audience away from his way of thinking. Because if I could demonstrate, even if I'm not going to convince Bart, if I could demonstrate to other people that his way of thinking entails hilarity on multiple levels, I think that's a win for me. I would consider that a win condition for the debate. If I was able to like persuade a lot of people off of his view, even if I wasn't able to change his view in particular. So in the cases where, so that's why I would still put ethical arguments on the table, because I know Bart, even though he wouldn't be convinced, he would flounder on them in a way that would make him look optically terrible to his audience. So I would still put our ethical arguments on the table to deal with somebody like Bart. Bart, for example, still doesn't have a good answer to name the trait. He's dismissed it multiple times. If I was to bring it up in a debate against him, he would flounder, and it would be great because his audience, he would look like a clown to his audience.
But I debated Joey Schultz as well, and his.
Yeah, I've talked to him too.
I didn't make a single ethical argument in the entire debate, but he still went off and talked. He's mentioned me in multiple other videos saying that my whole thing was an ethical argument.
Yeah, that's just dishonesty. Like,
yeah, it absolutely is, and he's just dismissing everything I have to say based on that.
So yeah, that seems like either dishonesty or confusion or both on his part. And I also went around and around and around with him on the health value of hunter-gatherer diets, the health value of meat. Basically his entire argument, because I was able to really pin it down to like what his values are in the discussion, and his values are hilarious. Basically, if it's natural, it's good, and that position entails a lot of things that he contradicted himself on, and he literally didn't care that he was contradicting himself. He actually said to me that he didn't care that he was contradicting himself. So that, if that was a recorded debate, that wasn't a recorded debate, but if that was a recorded debate, I would consider that a win condition for the debate. If I could get my interlocutor to say, I don't give a shit if I'm contradicting myself, that's good enough for me. That's good enough for me. And I declare victory at that point, and I just walk away. Because if you don't care if you're contradicting yourself, I don't know what motivates you. It's not consistency. And if it's not consistency, I don't know what it is. It's like, it's just aimless kind of groping for, pleasurable sensations, or what? Like, I don't know quite what would be motivating to somebody that doesn't care about logical consistency. So at that point, I kind of lose all sense of what it would mean to even communicate with this individual, and then I lose all interest in the debate. Then I leave. And that's pretty much what I did at that point in the debate. He even also said that he doesn't care if eating animals is unethical. He would still do it, because I did take it to ethics. But I'm a non-realist, so I take ethical propositions to be a reflection of our... I take normative propositions to be a reflection of our values, desires, goals, and wishes, and things like that. So when he says, I don't even care if it is unethical, I'll do it anyway. To me, that almost sounds like a contradiction on my view of what ethics are. That sounds like, I don't even care if it's against my values. I still value this. That sounds like a contradiction.
Right. I think. So, yeah, I don't think he understands what even ethics are.
No, I don't think so either. And he's only 18, right? So
yeah,
there's hope for him.
There's
a chance.
That's why I'm kind of viciously debunking his videos, because I'm like, oh man, maybe this guy can be turned.
Yeah. I had similar hopes, and I still have similar hopes, because he said to me in that debate as well, if you could demonstrate to me, if you could provide a persuasive argument, kind of implying that he does care about logical consistency. But anyway, if he says to me, if you could provide an argument for why red meat is bad, or why ancestral diets are bad, I will come off this view. The thing is that I wasn't able to do that I wasn't able to satisfy that based on his own epistemology, because he just takes the view that if it's natural, it's good. So I'm not sure how to persuade him, other than to just point out the hilarious contradictions and stuff that would be entailed from such a view. And when I did that, he said he didn't care if he was contradicting himself. So it seems to me that he's at the moment ideologically motivated, rather than rationally motivated.
I mean, he said to me, because I called him out, I was like, well, I think you're making an appeal to nature fallacy. And he said, well, the appeal to nature fallacy doesn't apply to nutrition, because in nature there's no animals on an unnatural diet experiencing health problems. I'm like, that's just another appeal to nature fallacy in the negative.
Yeah, so appeal to nature fallacies don't apply to nature because
don't apply to nutrition, he said,
are natural. It's almost his justification for that, it wasn't actually a proposition, it was just a tautology. It wasn't propositional. It's just saying that things in nature are natural. That doesn't explain why the appeal to nature fallacy wouldn't apply to nutrition. The appeal to nature fallacy applies if you're saying that something is good in virtue of it being natural. So it most certainly applies. He's just making a category error.
Yeah, and then I said, well, you would have to argue that the entire human body is now adapted in such a way that the meat is the best thing for it. And he said, well, that's just what happened. But yeah.
What does that even mean?
I think he just, I don't think he's thought it through that much. I think he's just in a rebellious phase of his life.
Yeah, I got similar impressions from him.
Anyway.
The only problem is, when you give teenagers who are going through a rebellious period of their lives, and they think they know more than people who've devoted their lives to researching these topics, you give them a YouTube account.
Yeah.
It's like, Jesus Christ, it's a disaster.
He's talking about debating vegan professors and stuff.
He's talking about what, sorry?
He's said he wants to debate vegan professors and doctors.
Oh, well,
I'm like,
you're not debate.
You're not going to get very far.
One of two people. He should.
I'm a doctor.
Really?
No. Julian's just trolling. So he should debate either Isaac Brown or Avi Bitterman, in my opinion. And I wasn't able to, I wasn't able to pin him because he rejected logic, but I imagine that people who are more experienced with dealing with that sort of sophistry, like Avi or Isaac, would pin him pretty easily.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. The debate that I had with him was very, 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 very bizarre. Because he was like, well, meat is good because it's ancient and we've been doing it for a long time. It's ancestral. And I was like, okay, well, do you take the view that smoking is bad? And he's like, yes. And I was like, well, smoking's also ancestral. Exposure to smoke, simpliciter, is also ancestral. In fact, we evolved mechanisms for detoxifying things like smoke. And he said, yeah, but it's different because it's not as ancestral. And it's like, what does that even mean? What is it like? So smoke, what's the argument for that? Smoke exposure is less ancestral than meat exposure? What's the argument for that? He wasn't able to provide one. And then when I told him that his view entailed a contradiction, he just said he didn't care. So...
Yeah, honestly, like, Joey and Bart, like, I just want to get really good at debating against non-vegans. I think I've got heaps of people sending me resources to go against Bart again, and Bart's offering, but I'm like, man, it's so toxic. I think I have better things I could do. They're smarter people.
Which, yeah, it gets me back to, like, what I was originally trying to communicate here, was that when debating non-vegans, I think it would just be really kind of instrumental to just know how to, like, pick your battles. So debating something like red meat being unhealthy, I think, is pretty straightforward. To also take the view that cheese is unhealthy, to also take the view that fish is unhealthy, I don't think those things are necessary. And I think that it would wind you up into trouble because it can be demonstrated that they are healthy. And if you do encounter somebody who's astute enough to point that out, it will get revealed in the debate, and it won't make you look very good. So I would just say be completely honest about what foods have what health value. So yes, it is the case that there are certain animal foods that are healthy. It is the case that I would say most animal foods are unhealthy. So learning like how to pick your battles and really just drive down on certain points. I have bogged down like 3-hour debates over a single word that has not been clarified. I had one debate, I think it was only like an hour long debate with a guy on a Discord server. His name is Highlander, and he was making all sorts of arguments about cause and effect relationships. And one of the things that he was saying was that cause and effect he was saying like, oh yeah, well, in order to establish a cause and effect relationship, you need these preconditions, these scientific preconditions, and then you can establish a cause and effect relationship. And it seemed like really bizarre to me because like it's something that he said just struck me as super weird and almost contradictory. So I was like, can you just define the word cause for me? And then this is where we got bogged down, because when he defined the word cause, he says it means when one state of affairs causes another state of affairs. And I was like, well, that's not a coherent definition because the word cause is showing up in the definition. So you need to provide me a definition that isn't self-referential and infinitely regressive in order for me to make sense of it. Because if the word that I'm trying to make sense of is showing up in the definition, that doesn't offer me additional clarity. You need to define this word. And he just tried over and over and over and over and over again to define the word cause. I think he went around and around and around for like an hour. We did not even get to the point. We didn't even get to the point of debating the data because he couldn't unpack what the fuck he meant by this word that he was using. He couldn't define it. So, like, I think really, really, really understanding what the language your interlocutor is using is critically important, and be super, super honest about whether or not it's understood. If your interlocutor has given you a definition that you don't understand or said a word that you don't understand, ask for clarification and gridlock the debate until that clarification is obtained. because until that clarification is obtained, you guys would basically just be gibberating in each other's general direction about nothing. You'd have two separate conversations because you don't have a shared understanding of the terms that are on the table. And that happens a lot in debate, where you basically end up in a situation where you have two people who are just jabbering at each other's general directions, and they're just like emoting at each other and saying a bunch of nonsense because they're basically having two separate conversations because they don't have shared understandings of the fucking words that are being used. So when he said cause, he wasn't referring to anything intelligible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because he was not referring to anything that was intelligible, when he used the word cause, I would take that as systematically invalidating for every single instance of the word cause that came up in his defense of his position, right? So if it's systematically invalidating, he's not actually saying anything that I can make sense of, right? So when I press him on that, and he can't give me a definition that I understand, we literally can't proceed with the debate. It can't happen. So at that point, okay, if you can't define the words that you're using, I'm out. I don't know if I disagree because I can't appraise the truth value of the terms. I can't appraise the truth value of your propositions because the terms that are contained within that proposition are unintelligible to me. And if that's the case, we can't have a debate. I don't know if the proposition's truth apt, right? So I think that's super, super important to be sensitive to when your interlocutor is giving you terms that don't make any sense. And that happened a lot with the debate with Joey.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I mean, I'm nowhere near the level of an analysis where I can just on the fly be like, oh, that didn't make sense. I'd rather just debate what I think people are interpreting.
Yeah, I think that would be, no offense, but I think that would be a mistake. If you are getting into a debate only on an assumption about what your interlocutor means when they use a certain term, then you run the risk of actually having two separate conversations, right? Like you have a conversation with your potentially erroneous interpretation of what they mean, and then they might be having another conversation with maybe a term that does make sense or a term that doesn't make sense, but there's no shared understanding of what those terms mean. And I think that's just going to end up leading to a lot of debates that actually just don't even need to happen. Because oftentimes, like, once I started doing semantic analysis on people, I found that most of the time there isn't even anything to debate against. Because most of the time, one of two things is true. Either they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and then we can't have a debate because they can't unpack what they're talking about. Or there's no disagreement at all because their definitions just cash out into something that I also agree with. And then oftentimes debates just don't even happen after the semantics have been cleared up. So I think that's still really, 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 really important to clear up semantics before even engaging in debate. Otherwise, yeah, you run the risk of just like emoting at each other and not actually having a discussion.
I feel you on that. It's just, I mean, for me personally, like most people I've debated are nowhere near the level of being able to unpack the definitions of the words they're using on the spot. And so I'd rather just show them that they're wrong with regard to health claims that they're making.
Well, see, my position there is that if it is true that most people aren't even at the level of being able to unpack the terms that they're using, if this is a recorded debate, leverage that. Because if you can demonstrate that your interlocutor has no fucking clue what they're talking about, and the claims that they're making can't be evaluated as like it can't be ascertained whether or not the propositions that they're putting on the table are truth apt, that's a win. Because it looks like they're just gibberating, right? It just looks like they're just emoting and gibberating at you. And I think you should leverage that. If most people genuinely don't even understand the terms that they're using, and you can demonstrate that, that's a win. That's a really easy win for the debate that you're getting into. And I think you should just leverage that.
Oh, if you're having a recorded debate, sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, even in a non-recorded debate, it's useful to the other person to be shown that they actually can't unpack their terms. Like, it's just useful for them because it allows them to refine their ideas. It allows you to, gain some extra practice and whatnot. Because, like, I'm honest with you when I say that when I started doing semantic analysis on people, most debates don't even happen. Most debates are a waste of time, and that's revealed after you start doing semantic analysis on people, because you'll find out that they don't understand their terms, or they're using terms you don't even disagree with, and then the debate doesn't even need to happen. Only, like, in most cases, the debate happens because people are just assuming what the other person means, and then they end up having two separate conversations and not an actual debate where they're directly engaging with one another. I think Dantas could probably agree with this. I think Mock and Dominic here probably agree with that too. That, like, understanding the terms that your opponent's using is like critically important for not even just debate, but like even just to get off the ground and have a discussion. Yeah, probably. You'd need to understand the terms of the.
Yeah, I agree.
Define ancestral. It's like, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, define ancestral, right? So yeah, say you're getting into a debate with one of these ancestral diet lunatics, and they say something like, ancestral diets are necessarily healthy or something like that. Like, immediately you have a way of crushing them on the semantics in a way that just gridlocks the debate and makes them look like a fool. So, like, there are tons of ways to approach that. Let me go into the VC text and put this proposition on the table. Ancestral diets are necessarily healthy. So, like, just taking a look at that proposition, okay, what is meant by ancestral diet? Is that every permutation of an ancestral diet? Is that any given food that has ancestral precedence, even if it's composing some new diets that nobody's ever eaten before? Like, even the term ancestral diet needs to be unpacked because it's not clear what that means.
Well, I went straight to the argument that he was Bart and Joey were arguing that we ate 70 to 80% of our diet was animal products back in the day, and I was like, well, are you measuring that by calories? Because that wouldn't even necessarily entail anywhere close to a carnivore diet.
Yeah, that's a good approach. Another approach would just be to say, okay, for what population? Because there are tons of diets that probably meet the definition of ancestral that we're nowhere close to that. We have diets that are as little as 10% animal foods, like, in the wildy, so to speak. We have, like,
in the wildy.
We have traditional cultures all over the world, and some of them eat as little as 10% animal products. Some people eat as many as 90% animal products. It's all over the board. So which ancestral diet's best, and how are we knowing which one's best? And then the next part of this proposition is necessarily, this is going to be problematic for them. Because if necessarily means that it would entail some kind of contradiction, if there was an ancestral diet that was unhealthy, they would need to provide an argument for that and actually show the contradiction. If necessity is taken to mean that it's impossible for it to be otherwise. And healthy, again, that's another word that needs to be unpacked. What is meant by unhealthy? If unhealthy just means it's in accord with my values, then most of the proposition I wouldn't even necessarily disagree with. This is why semantic analysis is super important. Just because even a debate proposition like this, you don't even get to debate the data. You don't even get to the epistemic questions or the empirical questions or anything like that, because you're literally going to get hung up on the fact that you're interlocutor is just throwing jargon at you that's really difficult to interpret, and it shouldn't be taken for granted that you guys have shared understanding. So, like, don't be shy about gridlocking a debate on semantics. Like, really, really, really don't be shy about that. Because oftentimes you'll just reveal that your interlocutor is full of shit and doesn't even know what the hell they're talking about, and they're not even using words that are intelligible.
I guess it's true.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I would rather...
Like, I feel like... Oh, yeah, go on, sorry.
Oh, I would rather just empirically wreck them.
I mean, no, you can get there. Like, you could get there. Like, it's not necessarily the case that you will get gridlocked somewhere where you just disagree on the semantics or agree on the semantics, and either way a debate just doesn't happen. You could very easily find people who will unpack it. I had a very long conversation with somebody who was able to unpack everything in intelligible terms. I think his name was like Aliska or Alexa or something like that. He came in here. I had a 3-hour debate with him about ancestral diets and the carnivore diet or whatever. And the thing that happened was he originally gave me a debate proposition that I didn't understand. And then I just asked him to unpack each and every single term in the debate proposition. It ended up being double the length, but he unpacked everything in a way that I could understand perfectly, and then we proceeded on with the debate. So it's not necessarily the case that you'll just get hung up on semantics and then that'll be the end of it. Oftentimes you will actually get to the empirical side of it.
Well, what would you suggest for me? Because the reason I'm debating this is just because I think I know more than, the average carnivore, but like, what would you suggest for me? Like, I'm not a genius of like analyzing the language and all that. Like,
well, yeah, no. I don't think you need to be a genius. You just need to be honest about what is and what isn't understood. That's literally all that's required. And I think you're a smart guy. Like, this is definitely like within the bounds of what you can accomplish, right? Just be honest with the person. So when you hear a proposition, red meat is healthy, ask them what they mean. Ask them, what do you mean by red meat? Because if that's just beef, then the empirical debate is going to be relegated to just beef, right? But if it's beef, goat, and lamb, then the empirical debate is going to include more things, right? So just get them to unpack everything that you think there might be a disagreement about. Or the proposition red meat is healthy. What does healthy mean? If healthy means that it exists along a spectrum of minimally to maximally health promoting, and it lands closer to the maximally health promoting side, then that's something you can have an empirical debate about. That's intelligible, and that's fine. You just be completely honest about any terms that, even if you think you understand them, getting clarity on exactly what's on the table is super, super important. So Dominic is saying, and by very healthy, you mean that it would end your suffering on this blue hell. Oh, damn it. You're Dominic's triggering my COVID here.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I'm getting over it.
We need to hurry the fuck up and get over it that we can see that Lane Norton debate.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll be debating Lane Norton as soon as I'm over COVID.
Yeah.
Nice.
But the thing is that I don't even think there will be a disagreement. I talked about this with Avi, and I agree with Avi on this, because I contacted Avi. I was like, okay, so what approach are you going to take? Like, are you just going to like NTT him on smoking, or are we going to get into a Magic the Gathering battle where we're throwing studies at each other? Like, what's the game plan here? And he just straight up said, I don't even think there's a disagreement. And obviously it's something that I considered, but it still seemed to me that there might be a disagreement that there probably would be a disagreement even after the semantics are cleared up. Avi seems confident that there wouldn't be a disagreement after the semantics are cleared up, and maybe there wouldn't be. But if there is a disagreement, then I guess we will still have the debate. But I actually don't anticipate that debate will be all that bad. I think honestly the opposition will concede.
Yeah.
But you could ask Lane why he doesn't buy vegan whey, because I think he lives in the US and there are now different brands of vegan whey, like My Protein makes it. This other brand, and he said that he would eat clean meat if it was the same. And now we have clean whey, but I never saw him talking about it or promoting it or consuming it. So maybe you could press him on this. Yeah.
I mean, that's more of like that's more of a normative thing than an empirical thing. Like, the normative question is whether or not he feels a particular normative demand or feels a particular ought toward consuming this non-dairy form of whey. He seemed to be implying, at the very least, that he would experience this normative demand, but he still seems to be like not doing it. So I think that even though it would be tangential to the debate that we're having, it would still be interesting to see him pressed on this publicly. Like, hey, we have vegan whey, so why are you still consuming dairy whey? Why are you just consuming the vegan whey?
Like, the red meat one will be kind of a give me. Like, all the hilarious shit will be everything but red meat. It'll be like the whole like dumbass. It'll be I guess the whole fruit and veg thing mitigating risk from red meat will be brain dead if he tries to do that. There'll be the entire but all the other facets. So like the whole fucking potato protein thing, this whey thing, and then if you choose to press on that, it's up to you. But I just personally think it'll be hilarious if that happens.
Yeah. No, I think. Well, I mean, what this is sort of often happens when you get into debates with Carnus is that hilarious shit almost invariably ensues when you really press them on their values and press them on consistency. Like, I think one of the most hilarious examples of this was Avi versus Mike Israetel. You remember that?
Oh God, no.
It was a very good faith debate on both sides, but Mike Israetel's position just cashed out into something that even the non-vegans in the audience were probably thinking was completely absurd. You know, like,
it was the political. What was it? Political precedence, I think.
No. It was if the entity in question had a lineage that traced back to Homo erectus. That was the trait. So basically that would entail that if and they had to be of a certain cognitive capacity, and they had to have like a whole bunch of other traits that were no different than animals. But basically it cashed out into if you found out that your neighbor's kid was like just genetically dissimilar enough to not be categorized as like being a descendant of Homo erectus, and they were mentally challenged to the point where they were cognitively kind of comparable to that of a farm animal, that it would be okay to kill them and eat them. Now that's what's entailed from Mike Israetel's position, and I think even the meat eaters in the audience are probably scratching their heads about that one.
Yeah, I make everyone, every time when someone talks about the species argument, I start talking about the Avatar movie, you know, with the Na'vi, with the blue skin. And I ask them if they were, when they watched the movie in the theaters, if they were on the human side when they watched the film, because the Na'vi, different species, you get lots of money and profit when you take their resources from them. And then suddenly they say, no, it was not right for the humans to kill the Na'vi and take the resources. But before that, they said, if it's not the human species, it's okay to exploit. So, yeah, I think with the Na'vi you can make emotional connection and might make the hypothetical more preferable to most people, because a lot of people saw the movie. And if you just say, oh, a human with dog ears, they say, no, it doesn't exist. But if you say Navi, most go with it because they saw the movie.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good approach that I hadn't considered before. It was actually just like giving somebody a hypothetical in the form of like movie characters that they like have previously had an emotional connection with, presumably. I think that's an interesting approach to it. I hadn't considered that before. Because usually I go a little bit more abstract, like say there was an alien species that like came down and they wanted to, you know, I don't know, they wanted to make peace with us, and you know, okay, so just because they don't belong to the species Homo sapien, would that mean that it would be okay to like go full District 9 on them and like just like lock them up into concentration camps and systematically execute them whenever you felt like it?
Yeah, District 9 is a good example too.
Yeah. It's a good movie.
Yeah, I wonder if they're doing a second part, because
I hope so. I feel like the actors might be a little bit too old for it now, though. Because it's like been almost like a decade and a half since the movie came out.
But there will be 3 new Avatar movies in the next years. They already made it, yeah. That's really, really good. Oh, they're good.
Yeah, so I guess I got around to saying everything that I wanted to say about like approaching debate and like best practice for approaching debate, like being super honest. Don't bite any bullets that are going to lead to hilarious places, like affirming that cheese is categorically bad, for example, like weirdness like that, like try to stay away from, because an astute carnist will capitalize on that. Yeah, and the 2 points in the debate itself, like Bart was affirming something that was literally mathematically impossible at one part in the debate, and there was an opportunity to pin him on the saturated fat thing like pretty early on. With Bart, actually, specific to people like Bart, I think it might actually be very good to run semantic analysis on them. Particularly with like certain words that they use, like association or cause, those types of things. Because, you know, if Bart says like you cannot derive causality from association, like or you can't infer causality from association though, I would just ask him, like, can you give me an example of any causal inference in the history of science that was not based on an association, and just see how he handles that. Because I don't think he'll be able to give an example of anything. Like, so like...
Well, he put the bullet and said, smoking's not proven to cause cancer.
Right. So, I guess at that point I would ask him what he means by prove.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it just means that, yeah, this is the thing about causal inference that I don't understand with these people. If they're saying something like, you know, we can't establish causality, but we can have a strong enough causal inference that it changes our prescriptions. Changes, like, you're just
redefining the term.
Yeah, well, there are two separate things here. There's causality, which has one kind of definition, and then there's causal inference. Now, nobody within the domain of science is really affirming that they have access to deterministic billiard ball causality that's independent of human minds. Nobody is claiming to have access to that. So if that's what Bart means, then I would actually agree with him that causality hasn't been demonstrated for a number of different things, smoking included. But we can have causal inferences. Now, if he thinks that causal inferences, or like if he like, I would want to know whether or not there's discordance between what he would consider grounds for causal inference and what he would consider grounds for like a shift in his attitude towards something, as in terms of whether or not you should or should not do it. So he makes a causal inference with regards to smoking, and he says that that's, you know, sufficient for him to recommend against smoking, and he would call it irresponsible. So it's like, okay, well, we understand now that that you can make a causal inference that affects your normative evaluation of something. That's great. Now the goal is to get him to set the bar for causal inference, and then just test his epistemic consistency across that bar, right? So if he sets the bar at, you need a relative risk of 11, what did he say, like 11,000 or something like
Yeah.
that? Like you need a relative risk of like 11,000. That's not mathematically possible for most diseases. So is he saying that there are some diseases that you literally can't establish causality for, or you can't have a causal inference for? So from there, I would just ask him if he, so it's like, okay, we know that we infer that smoking causes lung cancer. Well, how about smoking and colorectal cancer? How about smoking and cardiovascular disease, where the relative risks produced are actually the same between red meat and smoking? For cardiovascular disease, they're the same magnitude. For or at least you can find the level of smoking where the magnitudes are the same. So, for example, smoking 1 to 5 cigarettes a day produces the same magnitude relative risk for cardiovascular disease as red meat consumption. It's about 1.51. So I would just press this consistency there. So do you think smoking causes cardiovascular disease? Do you infer that? And if he says yes, just ask him why he doesn't infer it for red meat. Because if the bar for causal inference is some relative risk, they both meet the bar. And if he rejects one and accepts the other, that entails a contradiction, and then he needs to either he needs to explain more.
He wouldn't even let me use the word risk.
Yeah, that's just gibberish. Like I saw that part of the debate where he was like, you can't use the word risk. I would have pushed back and said, hey, listen, like, risk is just the nomenclature that's used within the literature to describe one event rate divided by another event rate.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to use a proprietary definition of the word risk, you're welcome to that. I would like to know what that definition is so that I can understand how you're using the word risk. But when I'm using the word risk, I mean it in the standard way that is divulged and understood in the literature, or it's just one event rate divided by another event rate. So that's the way risk is defined in the literature. That's the way I'm using it. You can't tell me I can't use it that way, because that's literally just, it's just in propositional logic. It would be equivalent to saying, it would be equivalent to say, you have one predicate with a bidirectional with another predicate, right? Risk is logically equivalent to this: one event rate divided by another event rate. That's the definition in the literature. I'm free to use that definition. If you think that definition is incoherent, derive the contradiction. If you don't think it's incoherent, then I'm going to use it, and I want you to understand what I mean when I'm using it, right? So then you've cleared up the semantics. If he still rejects it, he's being a fucking idiot. And presumably he would accept it if he's unable to derive a contradiction. And then you could just proceed on with the conversation, continue using the word risk. And if he wants to take issue with that, he's just being an idiot. So, like, that's how I would kind of handle it in a debate with Bart. If you wanted to object to my use of the word risk, I'd just clarify what I meant by risk. It's one event rate divided by another event rate. Simple shit. So if he sets his bar for causal inference at some astronomical relative risk, a relative risk that's mathematically impossible for certain diseases, he would kind of actually be saying that he wasn't able to establish a causal inference for certain diseases, like cardiovascular disease. So if he said that he did believe that smoking caused cardiovascular disease, that would entail a contradiction. And assuming that contradiction gets resolved somehow, and we're now just comparing the relative risk of smoking to the relative risk of red meat, well, they're both the same. So if he accepts causal inference on the basis of relative risk for smoking, why wouldn't he accept it for red meat? If he rejects one and accepts the other, he has another contradiction, and I don't know how he would resolve that. He would probably just go on to talk about some other nonsense, like I've heard I've been in so many debates about red meat. I've heard so many arguments like, oh, the R squared, oh, the I squared. The R squared needs to be above a certain number. The I squared needs to be below a certain number. You need to have a certain number of cohort studies. The confidence intervals need to be confined to within a given range. Like, I've heard that one before. And you hear all sorts of sophistry. And you just, if you can provide data that meets his goalposts, you can always just kind of chase down contradictions. And that's when the study exchanging comes in, when you're actually getting into the empirics of what the data shows and whatnot. That's usually the part of the debate that I like to avoid, is like just throwing studies at each other, although it is satisfying like to throw a study at somebody and just shut them up immediately. I really dislike getting into that, because I feel like it's just like, it takes up time, and you have to screen share, you have to read stuff, and I would much rather get into like the epistemic debates, philosophical debate, the semantic debate. I'd much rather have the conversation just kind of linger there, than getting into study exchanges. But when they do happen, they can be pretty hilarious. I'm just kind of describing like what I would do against Bart. I'm kind of rambling at this point, so I'll let you talk for a bit.
Oh yeah, I appreciate the advice. I mean, obviously, even if I had integrated all of this advice, he did kind of have the debate stacked against me. So it'd be interesting to see how someone a little bit.
Muting you.
Yeah, well, his mic just overrid mine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how.
Were you guys also on Discord?
No, we were on StreamYard or something.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah.
So if he interrupted me, then I was inaudible. So there's multiple moments throughout the debate where I made good points, but he was like, no, and then you couldn't hear me.
Yeah. No, he does that kind of shit. I think I don't know. So I was supposed to debate Bart. You should. Bart was actually supposed to debate. Sorry, what was that?
Oh, you should debate it. It would be fun.
Oh, no, I plan to. The invitation's on the table. It's up to him now.
Yeah, I watched your videos.
Yeah. So there's only three options for him. Either he debates Avi, or he affirms a contradiction, or he says that my terms are perfectly reasonable. Those are the only three options, right? So it's really, the ball's in his court. It's out of my hands. I gave him the invitation. I set the terms, because he's the one who invited me. Just like Avi is the one who invited him, and his argument was, I don't need this debate. I don't need you, so I'm the one who's going to set the terms. Bart invited me. I can say the exact same thing. I don't need this debate. I don't need you. So I'm the one who's going to set the terms. So I have symmetry between my approach and Bart's approach from the outset. And I said, I will debate you when you drop your unreasonable stipulations that you're placing on Avi and have a debate with him. And he says, well, no, your stipulations have nothing to do with this debate. And I was like, hold on. Your stipulations had nothing to do with the debate with Avi. That's not a differential property between the two stipulations. They both had nothing to do with either debate. So either you affirm a contradiction here, or you admit that I'm reasonable, or you go back on what you did before and actually debate Avi. I left him in a pickle on the subject, and I think this is why he hasn't publicly discussed the email exchange that I've had with him since, because I kind of left him in a pretty uncomfortable pickle.
I think you have
got some shit that you need to work out.
I think you have better principles than me. I agreed to debate him even though I didn't like any of the conditions that he set, just because I have like no viewers at this point and I need more experience debating, so I just thought I'd do it anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like Bart is the kind of debater that it's weird. It's weird because Bart is not at all a very high level debater, like at all. But the type of sophistry that he puts on the table is difficult for even strong debaters to wrestle with if they don't know precisely why what he's saying is nonsense. And it actually takes like some pretty decent domain knowledge to understand why he's saying nonsensical things. So the arguments that he puts on the table are very, very weak to people with certain domain knowledge. So he's not a very strong debater, but it just takes specific knowledge to know how to defeat what he's saying. Yeah, he's a slippery cocksucker.
Yeah, I mean, when I pointed out to him that you could still have a diet consisting of more than 51% of the servings you eat as plants under the calorie percentage he was giving us 70 to 80, he just started saying, well, you're saying that they could have eaten mostly plants, but the thing is they didn't. And I'm saying, well, I'm just going by your data that you gave me.
Yeah, I mean, just ask him for the argument. It's like, okay, so you're saying they didn't do that, so demonstrate it. You know?
Yeah, it's all for his audience. Even if you watch the end of the debate, I just linked it. Right at the end, he said, "Yeah, it's all for clicks and views."
Yeah. But just as one like kind of final piece of advice, and it kind of ties into some of the advice that I was trying to give earlier, is never fucking grant these people intelligibility. Never grant these people that what they're saying actually makes any sense, right? Never grant it to them. You press them on every single stupid thing that comes out of their fucking mouth. Right?
True. That's the best advice you've given all day. That is genius. I'm going to do that.
Press them on every single stupid thing that they've said, right? So if they say, oh, well, you're saying that they could have gotten 50% of their calories or 50% of their diets from plant foods, but they just didn't. Ask for the argument. Ask for the evidence. Like, okay, so you're saying that they did not, that this literally did not happen, right? You're not making a claim. He's not agnostic about it. He's saying that it didn't happen. Ask for the argument. Show it to me. Show me that this didn't happen. If he any kind of stupid bullshit claims that he puts on the table, like a relative risk of 11,000 is necessary for a causal inference. It's like, what's the argument for that? What's the evidence for that? Is this accepted within any domain that it would be relevant to? Is it accepted within biomedical science? Is it accepted within nutrition science? Is that accepted would such a standard be accepted in any domain where risk is the thing to be discussed, the thing to be assessed? Press on every single stupid little thing, because what it does is it puts them on the defensive the entire time. And the longer you can keep this motherfucker on the defensive, the more opportunities that he's going to have to just unravel. The more shit that he has to explain, the more opportunities that he's going to put on the table for things like inconsistency, contradiction, because let's be clear, these people do not have consistent epistemic frameworks at all. None of them. Even Bart, his epistemic framework isn't even intelligible. It doesn't even make any sense. Because he affirms things like infinitely regressive definitions and he affirms contradictions. So his epistemic framework actually isn't even something that can be appraised at the end of the day. Like, because it doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, I agree. And actually, that's probably the best advice. And I'm going to go and do some more debates in the next little bit. And that's
for sure.
That's a good thing to have them. And just like, what do you mean by that? Like, can you actually
exactly?
Yeah.
Just and be honest. Be perfectly honest. Like, if they put any terms on the table that you think there could even be a point of disagreement about, just ask them clarifying questions about what they mean. And sometimes you'll hold up an entire debate with just clarifying questions. A good example of this, if you want to look up the debate between infrared and ask yourself, or
I have seen that.
Jump and ask yourself.
I see that too. Yeah.
The entire debate was held up. Like in the case of infrared, the entire debate was held up because Isaac could not obtain clarity about what infrared meant by the word bad.
Yeah.
Couldn't obtain clarity.
I need to go and read this logic.
It was a 2-hour video. They didn't even have a debate. Right?
I need to go and study logic and whatever the field of philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, it's useful to at least to get an understanding of propositional logic.
Do you have any resources you would recommend?
Pardon me?
Would you recommend any resources? I was probably just going to rent out some books and...
Yeah, my understanding of propositional logic came from getting my ass kicked at a bunch of conversations with people.
I can recommend something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Get a book called An Introduction to Formal Logic by Peter Smith. It's great.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
And it's super cheap. Yeah. If you don't mind reading, then yeah, it's great.
Thank you. Yeah, I will.
Yeah, I just had a bunch of people, like, because I happen to find myself in a position where I'm kind of like kind of the figurehead of a giant community now. I find myself able to access a lot of brilliant minds and just ask them questions and bounce ideas off of them, and they're just like always here. If I was to just type in the chat right now in the philosophy channel, like, can somebody help me with this question in propositional logic, or can somebody help me with this question in philosophy? Like, dozens of people would all of a sudden just chime in and start answering my question. So I'm in a bit of a unique position here because I have like pretty good direct access to a lot of brilliant people, and that's kind of how I learned about propositional logic and whatnot. Was just getting my ass kicked by a bunch of people who are smarter than me on that topic. But yeah, I would check out that book. I haven't read it, but I've seen it recommended by a lot of people. Even people have recommended it to me. So it's got to be good.
Yeah, nice. All right, well, yeah, I better head out now. But yeah, thanks so much for this.
Sure. No worries, man. No worries. I look forward to seeing your debates in the future.
Yeah, I'll be watching your channel now as well. I'm subscribed, so.
Thanks, dude. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. You do good content.
Do you have a YouTube channel, Vegan Bazooka?
Yes, I do. I just linked my debate with Bart K in this chat.
Oh, okay. Okay, nice. I'll check it out.
Yeah, I'm pretty new and noobish, but yeah. Now I've got some advice and I'm gonna work on it.
We'll be applying some anti-fragile principles to you during if you want to stay in the community and just get kind of knocked around for a little bit, like, you'll come out a very strong debater by the end of it. I promise you.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's get some mock debate started.
Yeah. Dantas, you will be affirming the proposition that the Earth is cylindrical, and Vegan Bazooka, you will be affirming the proposition that the Earth is cubical in shape. and you guys are going to be debating right now. Go.
Right.
Well, you see.
Wait, seriously? Wait, hold on.
Oh my god.
Let me see. How would I go about this?
No, not for real. We're not doing this right now.
Oh, okay. I was like, okay, all right. Let's see. I'll probably pull some like sophistry bullshit with like how the Earth is closer to a cylinder than a sphere, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, like, dude, you've never been to the poles. The poles are flat. Everything else is round, sure. But when you get to the poles and you see the edge, you see that they're just flat. So, yeah, I think the point is, and a lot of them will point to, like, individual trials that show, like, a direction of effect that points toward harm. Like, a lot of them will bring up the Minnesota coronary experiment, or Sydney diet heart study, or the rose corn oil experiment, or even the rose olive oil experiment, and maybe even the Women's Health Initiative, which would be really weird to bring up to make that point. But yeah, all of those trials had results that were explainable in the end.
Sorry, are you talking about trials that were meta-analyzed by Hooper et al.?
No, some of them were left out because, the Minnesota coronary experiment was left out because the risk of bias was too high. It didn't meet their inclusion criteria. Sydney diet heart study was included, but I think that there would be valid reasons for excluding it, even though Hooper didn't. I don't think it should be included. Rose corn oil, it was a small trial, like, nobody cares. There were better trials, it's just superseded by better evidence. Yeah, Minnesota coronary experiments, high risk of bias. They only had 12 months of follow-up on average, and there was an 83% attrition rate. They couldn't even meet their power, so, like, I don't know why anybody takes that trial seriously. Sydney diet heart study, the margarine that they were given in the intervention group was, like, high in trans fat, so, like, again, like, I don't see why anybody takes that trial seriously. Rose corn oil, like I said before, it's a small trial. I don't know why anybody would think that would be, like, more credible than, say, the LA Veterans trial, for example, or the Oslo diet heart study, for example.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's just it's funny because I just posted in your VC text his actual claim, word for word, which is a bit wordy, but I think it breaks down to all 5 of the following meta-analysis agree that there is no meaningful association between intake of saturated fat and incidence of cardiovascular problems. And then under each, if you want, I can actually send the specific, he made us like a sub-claim under each of the meta-analyses. So, for example, under the Hooper one, he said the study found no effects of reducing saturated fat in heart attacks, strokes, or all-cause deaths, which I actually might agree with. But then it's a little bit misleading because the study actually found that reducing dietary saturated fat reduced the risk of combined cardiovascular events by 21%. So it's just saying that it found no effects of reducing saturated fat on heart attacks. But then if you actually look at combined cardiovascular events, I don't know, it seems a bit misleading. That's just my intuition.
Yeah, like a lot of the meta-analyses will actually find that there was no statistically significant association with stroke or all-cause mortality or even cardiovascular disease mortality or anything of the like. He's like, yeah, that's all fine, man. Like, because not every single trial was powered to actually detect meaningful differences in those endpoints. Like, all-cause mortality is an extremely insensitive endpoint to budge in any particular direction. It doesn't shock me that there's no statistically significant difference found within, like, the half a dozen or so, like, less than 5-year trials that were included. Yeah, that doesn't shock me. It literally just, like, I would expect that. So the all-cause mortality thing is like really hilarious, and
it's irrelevant to his original claim anyway.
Is, like,
sorry,
pardon me.
It's it's irrelevant to his original claim in the anyway, because his claim is to do with cardiovascular problems. So for him to then
all cause mortality is tangential.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So with the stroke thing, the stroke thing is a little weird because like if you're going to die, like so say that saturated fat is a risk factor for you and you've been consuming it since you were a child and it is a risk factor for you and you do end up having some kind of atherosclerotic cardiovascular problem, it is far more likely that if that's going to kill you, you're going to die of a myocardial infarction before a cerebral infarction, because cerebral infarction affects people who are like much older, right? You'd sooner die of a myocardial infarction in your 50s than die of a cerebral infarction in your 70s. There's a survivorship bias here because the people for whom saturated fat was the highest risk factor, they're already dead. By the time they enter the risk category to have a stroke, they're already dead from a myocardial infarction by the time they get there, right? So
is that the case?
It's a survivorship bias effect when you're looking at stroke.
Would that be reflected in the average age of death from those conditions, or would you be looking at something different?
Well, no. I mean, you just infer it, right? Like, so if saturated fat's your largest risk is a significant risk factor for you, and you're going to have an atherosclerotic cardiovascular event, you're probably going to have the event in your 50s and have a myocardial infarction, as opposed to having the event in your 70s and having a cerebral infarction. You just sooner die of an MI, so it gives the appearance that it gives the appearance that one is not associated when it's really just survivorship bias effect. I'll be 1 second. 1 second. All right, I'm back.
Yeah, so the one I'm the most interested in is, so the second meta-analysis that he's claiming supports his hypothesis is D'Souza, RJ et al. Intake of saturated and trans fats. Intake of saturated and trans unsaturated fatty acids and rise of all-cause mortality, CVD and type 2 diabetes, systematic review and meta-analysis of observational studies being...
Here, let me see if I can find something for you, because I actually a couple of years ago I did my own meta-analysis on this subject, and I could just send you the forest plot. It's actually super interesting. So in the VC text, you see the forest plot here. This is a forest plot of all of the meta-analyses that have investigated the relationship between cardiovascular disease and saturated fat in prospective cohort studies. And what I've done here is I've segregated them all, like I've subgroup analyzed them all by the intake ranges in those particular cohorts. And almost invariably, you see the increase in risk precisely where we would expect it to be, at around 10% of calories. So in the first subgroup, which is 0 to 10 grams a day to greater than 20 grams a day, that's the range from low to high. And then we have subgroup 2, which is about 15 grams a day to above 30 grams a day. That's like around the 10% of calories threshold. And then we have just 2 subgroups that have ranges that are above that. The relationship between saturated fat and cardiovascular disease is a sigmoidal curve. It's an S-shaped curve, right? So there's a range of saturated fat that's perfectly like healthy to consume. And that's like under 20 grams a day. So if you're under 20 grams a day, if you're measuring from low to high, you're not going to really see a statistically significant effect. But then there's this uptick range that exists between like somewhere around like 15 to 35 grams a day, where the risk swings up. And then investigating high to low on the top of that risk curve is also not going to produce statistically significant results. And that's borne out in this data here. So each one of these are individual meta-analyses. Mine is in there. I did a separate meta-analysis. I should take mine out. 1 second. Because I don't want anybody to say like, oh, well, that's not published though. It's like, okay, whatever. So I'll send you the one that without mine, just in case anybody wants to take issue with it. But yeah, so D'Souza, Harcombe, Mazziti, Siri-Torino, Ski, Fazoo, they all see the same direction of effect, and most of them are statistically significant, or half of them are statistically significant. 2 are borderline. Skeef is like the confidence intervals are a fucking barn door. But overall, you see the effect so consistently from meta-analysis to meta-analysis. 8% increase in risk, 22, 21, 30, 16, 8% increase in risk. And then you look at the ones in the other subgroups, and it's like they're all over the place.
Yeah. So yeah, he used Siri-Torino and
yeah, he's just confused.
That one.
And Siri-Torino and Ronald Krauss were also confused when they did that meta-analysis. Because actually, the fuckery goes even further. Like, to do a straight linear summation, expecting every single increase in saturated fat to translate into a statistically significant increase in risk, that's just stupid. Like, I don't know why we'd just assume that based on the randomized controlled trials. We'd assume non-linearity. And when you test for it, you see the effect. When you do even the most superficial kind of cursory test for non-linearity, you see the effect.
Could you say that again? What you wouldn't expect to find?
Yeah, so you wouldn't expect. So if you just throw all of the cohort studies into a forest plot, you wouldn't expect, like, it's not clear that you would expect to see a statistically significant increase in risk, because not every intake range associates with a statistically significant difference in cardiovascular disease outcomes. And that's because the relationship between saturated fat and cardiovascular disease is an S-shaped curve, which means that there are going to be points along that curve that are not going to associate with risk, that are not going to associate with statistically significant differences in risk. So unless you're testing for that non-linearity, it's going to go unnoticed, right? Like, if you just throw everything haphazardly into a forest plot, it doesn't shock me that the total summated finding is non-significant. In fact, I would probably expect that. But if you test for non-linearity, like do a subgroup analysis divided up by intake, or do a dose response curve, you see the effect. Like, when you test for non-linearity, you see the effect. Only when you try to fit a linear model like a meta-analysis do you not see the effect.
Right, because I went in.
But I don't know why. I don't know why we would just throw everything into a single forest plot when we have a literal meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials showing that the effect is non-linear.
Yeah, if I'm thinking of the forest plot you're talking about from the Siri Torino study, if you actually just go down the list of all of the papers that were on the, showing no correlation side of things, you get the McGee study, Framingham, Goldbord, O et al, and all of these ones actually implicated saturated fat anyway. So, I don't know if that's how you would go about assessing it, but Pietinen.
You want to say that one more time, sorry?
So if you actually go down the list of studies on the side of the forest plot showing no association, most of those studies implicate saturated fat anyway. Like Framingham, for example. There's the Pietinen paper. There's the O et al paper. I didn't write that properly. Les Tadir.
Yeah. There's tons of them.
But they're being used to show that there's no correlation. But that's not what the papers found in the first place, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Okay, that's with adjustments. Saturated fat grams per day with adjustments, without adjustment. This is old. Where the hell did the new one go? I had a new one. Because I have all of the data from all of these cohort studies already kind of separated out. Where did that go? I had an updated version that was just a banger. CVD metas. Shit. I don't have it anymore, I guess. I sent it to Alec. Maybe I still have a copy of that in my conversation with Alec. Hold on. Alec's a clown, but at least I might have that forest plot here. So that one's... It does attenuate the effect. Okay, yeah. Copy image. Okay, I'm going to put this in the PC text. So here is my meta-analysis. I was going to write a paper on this. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I did a systematic literature search. All best practice. It's just as good as a meta-analysis that you would find in the literature anywhere. I've taken graduate studies level courses on systematic review and meta-analysis, so I know the ins and outs of the process, so you don't have to worry about this being fucky or anything like that. So, like, you look at all of the cohort studies, and they're all separated by their intake from high to low. And what you generally see is it's in that 10% of calories range where you find a statistically significant effect, a 44% increase in the risk of cardiovascular disease. My meta-analysis has the most amount of cohort studies out of any meta-analysis on this subject that I've seen, and it produces the most powerful effect size that I've ever seen. A 44% increase in risk within that subgroup is pretty big compared to what other people have found, or what could be gleaned from the other ones. Like if you look at the forest plot that I sent you previously, 22% increase in risk, 21, 30, 16, and then you look at mine and it's like a 44% increase in risk. It's like, holy shit.
Yeah. This is great. I'm gonna keep this and actually dig into those numbers a bit more later. But just in regards to the D'Souza, does it?
Yeah.
Because I want to have the ability to just kind of take it off the table when someone brings it up in a debate, for example. Like, is it an issue that it's using the grade analysis? Like, isn't that for drug trials?
It's contentious. I mean, honestly, it doesn't affect the data, right? Like it doesn't affect the data. It just affects the degree of credence that we give to it. It affects the the extent to which we would consider the data like high quality or low quality or what have you.
What would you say if someone was trying to use it against you?
I personally take grade to be inappropriate for nutrition science personally, because some things just literally don't apply to nutrition science, like performance bias, worries and concerns about performance bias. It's not clear that things like blinding can be helped in nutrition science. Like, I don't know how you blind somebody to a piece of chicken in front of them. Like, it seems weird to me. So I personally don't really agree. There's a new system that came out. Lucas Schwing-Shackle came up with it. It's called the Nutrigrade system. It's another type of evidence quality grading system that's custom tailored to nutrition science.
Yeah.
It's really good. It's a lot of really interesting ideas have come out of Lucas Schwing-Shackle. His papers are a fucking banger too. There's another point. So people like Bart, one thing to be sensitive to, they're making like claims about what can or cannot be used to inform causality. They'll just do this move where they set the bar unreasonably high, so even the best randomized controlled trials that we have on the subject still won't meet the bar.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Just say like, okay, you're taking a proprietary view of causal inference that isn't shared by anybody else in that particular domain or any adjacent domain, and that's fine. If that's your view, then nothing can satisfy you. The most you could do with somebody at that point is try to tease a contradiction out of them by looking at things like cigarettes and lung cancer, cigarettes and colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer is a really good one. Cigarettes and cardiovascular disease is another really good one to try to tease contradictions of these people with. But yeah, he's just going to set the bar so unreasonably high that even these randomized controlled trials don't meet the bar. But if you do happen to meet one of these people who doesn't have such a ridiculous epistemic standard with regards to things like causal inference and such, like, as long as they don't have like ridiculously high standards and they'll accept randomized controlled trials, one thing to point out to them is that nutritional epidemiology actually is consistent with randomized controlled trials 92% of the time. They concord in the supermajority of cases. So if they have a high credence in randomized controlled trials, I don't understand why they wouldn't at least have a similarly high credence in nutritional epidemiology, because the methods have clearly been validated.
Yeah, it's good to have those validations on hand in debates. Like, for example, you can show that food questionnaires are correlated to a large degree with actual biomarkers for those people who deny epidemiology based on questionnaires. And that's another good one. So you're saying that the randomized trials are like highly consistent with actual epidemiology.
Oh yeah. 92% of the time they're concordant with one another.
And the thing is, like, if something's true, it's going to be implicated in epidemiology. So why would you just blanketly throw it out anyway?
Well, it might be. It might be. It depends on how you structure the investigation. It depends on the measurement methods. Like, that wouldn't be true of nutritional epidemiology that uses really bad measurement methods like 3-day food records. Like, those are terrible. They don't reflect long-term intake at all.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so things like validated food frequency questionnaires that have been validated against things like biomarkers, validated against things like 28-day food diaries, longer-term, more robust measures of food intake. Those types of food frequency questionnaires are fine. And honestly, like, if somebody wants to shit on food frequency questionnaires, if somebody wants to shit on nutritional epidemiology or some aspect of its methodology, just say, hey, that's cool. The methodology certainly has flaws. The methodology could certainly, could certainly use some improvement, but those things were not a barrier. Those things should not pose themselves as a barrier to causal inference, because nutritional epidemiology, despite the methodological limitations, is consistent with randomized controlled trials 92% of the time. So no matter what you want to say to kind of hand wave away nutritional epidemiology with regards to the methodology, it's just straight up an irrelevant point. It's a red herring, because the methodology has been validated against randomized controlled trials. So what the fuck does it matter? The methodology is clearly valid enough to produce a 92% concordance with RCTs. So, I mean, maybe it does need improvement, but it doesn't seem to be the current standards don't seem to be a barrier.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously, he linked the Chowdhury. I think that's the one that had a correction. I'm not even.
I think so.
I'm not even sure if that paper would even support his position.
Chowdhury, I think that Chowdhury was the one that was investigating biomarkers, and they found that there was a benefit of certain animal trans fats, if I remember correctly, and then they found that there was a benefit of odd chain saturated fatty acids, which I don't even deny. But those aren't the saturated fatty acids that we think are problematic anyway.
Association of dietary circulating.
If
supplement fatty acids.
Yeah, I think Chowdhury was the biomarker one. Yeah. Yeah, and we've discovered recently that biomarkers of odd chain saturated fatty acids are confounded by fiber intake, or not confounded, but they're biased by fiber intake, because for whatever reason, when you eat a lot of fiber, those fatty acids go up in the blood. Not sure why, but they do. So it shouldn't be taken for granted that odd chain saturated fatty acids are necessarily tracking dairy intake, although I think that they probably do. So dairy and fiber both adjust those biomarkers upward for odd chain saturated fatty acids like 15-0 and 17-0 and stuff like that. Yeah, both fiber and dairy increase them, and I fully expect both fiber and dairy to decrease cardiovascular disease risk. So it doesn't surprise me that no matter where the source of those saturated fatty acids is coming from, that you see a reduction in risk. Like that would just be expected.
Yeah, even I think it's the Leos Dotter paper that was. Yeah.
They
controlled for fiber intake. Like, wouldn't that just completely nullify your results with regards to investigating saturated fat?
So Leah's daughter, if I remember correctly, Leah's daughter 2007, they weren't investigating biomarkers; they were investigating intake. So if they were investigating the relationship between saturated fat and CBD and adjusting for fiber, I would consider that to be fine. If they were looking at some, if they were looking at odd chain fatty acids in the blood, I can't remember if they were, but if they were looking at like odd chain saturated fatty acids in the blood and they wanted to know if there was a direct effect of dairy and they adjusted for fiber, I would consider that to be fine. Yeah, there wouldn't be anything wrong with that.
So they concluded no trend towards higher cardiovascular event risk for women or men with higher total or saturated fat intake.
After
controlling
and the thing about Leah's daughter, is that their intakes of saturated fat were enormous. We're talking 40 grams a day to 60 grams a day. So that it is also expected that you wouldn't see an association in that range. Like that's just expected.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the range is so astronomically high, you're not going to have enough statistical power to actually detect a meaningful difference. Because everybody's just eating so much saturated fat. It's like, of course, it's just going to get washed out.
Yeah, you need to compare a greater range of intakes.
Yeah, exactly. Greater contrast and the correct range. There is a correct range to investigate with saturated fat, and that's between 15 to 35 grams a day. Within that range, you see the effect. In any other range, you don't really see the effect. Probably because there's just not enough statistical power. Like it could be one of two things. Either the relationship is a sigmoidal curve, or the relationship is linear, but there's only enough statistical power to detect the differences in outcomes within a given range, and the confidence intervals are like an hourglass shape. That's compatible too. There are a bunch of different ways to kind of visualize this that are compatible with the data. But nevertheless, what we do understand for certain is that when you cross that intake range, risk goes up. Right? So the 15 to 35 grams a day, you cross around 10% of calories, you cross that threshold, risk goes up. That's consistent with the randomized controlled trials, it's consistent with the epidemiology, and that's consistent, and the relationship between those two variables is consistent with our understanding of LDL, and it's consistent with our understanding of LDL or saturated fats effects on LDL. All of this shit is reconcilable. And if Bart K wants to make some statement like, oh, there's no evidence, he just needs to provide an argument for that, because clearly there's evidence.
Yeah, 100%. So, are you familiar with Schwab U et al.?
Maybe.
Maybe. I can link it.
Was it a cohort study?
Effect of the amount and type of dietary fat on risk factors for cardiometabolic risk factors. I think it's a meta-analysis.
On risk factors, so like LDL and stuff like that.
Yeah. Effect of the amount and type of dietary fat on risk. It's one of the ones Bart was using to support his claim, so I imagine it's a meta-analysis. A systematic review.
Yeah, I think what you'll ultimately find is that the evidence that he brings to the table is compatible with the prevailing paradigm and doesn't provide a stable defeater or argument to the prevailing paradigm. I think that's the thing that should be emphasized. Just, you have to be super familiar with the literature, though. Like, almost down to the cohort study, you have to be familiar with it in order to really tackle an idiot like Bart. You have to be almost familiar with every single one, where you can go like, hey, no, I've read that, and listen, they were consuming saturated fat within a range where we wouldn't even expect to see an association. So it doesn't surprise me that we didn't find one. But then when you look at these, where they cross the intake range that should be presupposed based on the randomized controlled trials, hey, holy shit, wouldn't you know it, we find the effect. And to know exactly what those cohort studies is probably going to be pretty important. Yeah, like you have to be super familiar with the literature just to make a case for, like, yeah, dude, like, come on, like these results from the papers that even you sent me are compatible with the prevailing paradigm, and here is why. And just explain the sigmoidal relationship, explain the randomized controlled trials and the meta-regressions, and then say, like, listen, if you subgroup analyze all these fucking cohort studies by these criteria, you see the effect just like you see it in the randomized controlled trials. So we have two tiers of the evidence hierarchy that are in complete agreement with one another. And we have, we have multiple tiers, actually. And we can cross, we also have compatibility with from other domains as well. He'd have to deny so much that like, to do so would just make him look like a fucking red-nosed honking cartwheeling clown.
Do you think the Esselstyn/Ornish trials have any relevance to this argument?
Oh, like the weird, like heart disease reversal studies.
Like, would it be a valid point to say, well, these trials show reduction in the lowest saturated fat intakes in terms of heart disease risk?
If I remember correctly, those studies, like those studies are weird because
they did yoga.
A lot of people use them to, a lot of people use them to make arguments for heart disease reversal. I think they could probably be used as evidence for mitigating cardiovascular disease risk to some degree, but I wouldn't put them on the table in defense of heart disease reversal because
no, it's more just to counter the claim that saturated fat has nothing to do with heart disease.
Oh, I think there's a stronger argument to be made. You just show that saturated fat affects LDL, and then you show that LDL affects cardiovascular disease risk.
Right. So you've got the Hegstead.
You just make the So you just the Hegstead equation, or the Mechanistic meta-regression analysis is actually really good too. Let me see if I can find that Mechanistic 2006 saturated fat. It's a PDF. Effects of saturated fatty acids. Yeah, this meta-regression analysis is a good one to put on the table because it shows this is basically like a synthesis of all of the metabolic ward trials. I think there were like almost 400 of them on like saturated fat and its effects on blood lipids and stuff. So that one's good. Yeah, so this one, just make a big inductive inference, right? So just say like, listen, we know that LDL particles cause atherosclerosis. He doesn't grant that, but honestly, like he just needs to provide an argument to the contrary. That isn't just mechanistic speculation. Oh, damn it. Okay, so yeah, just show that LDL particles. There are a bunch of studies. Mendelian randomization agrees. RCTs agree across 9 different fucking interventions, 9 different mechanisms. All of the evidence from this domain agrees that there's a linear and proportional relationship between LDL and CVD. And when you look at the effect of saturated fat on LDL, and you are presupposing or you're inferring that there's a linear and proportional relationship, a causal linear and proportional relationship between LDL and CVD. Saturated fat increases LDL, therefore saturated fat increases CVD. I think it'd just be like a pretty straightforward kind of modus ponens kind of thing, like if this, then that, this, therefore that.
Is that link
and
you
then,
just...
and just...
Sorry, is that link you just sent more relevant to the idea that saturated fat raises LDL or that LDL causes CVD?
Yeah. That saturated fat raises LDL.
Okay, yeah.
There's very, very, very definitive evidence in there.
There's 2 types of deniers, right?
Particularly...
there
are a bunch of shitty arguments out there. I don't deny that. So like, here's the regression analysis that they did comparing predicted and observed changes in serum LDL concentration with differing levels of saturated fat. And you can predict this with a very, very tight degree of certainty. You can predict how much somebody's LDL is going to change by how much saturated fat you give them. It's a linear and proportional relationship that's very, 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 very predictable, based on 69 different metabolic ward studies. So, I mean, if somebody wants to deny that there's a relationship, they would need to deny this, and I don't know what the I don't know what the defeater for this is. I think that would just be sophistry.
So then the final nail in the coffin would be to show that LDL causes CVD.
Correct. Yeah, that would be the final nail in the coffin. But Bart would never accept that. He thinks that he has some weird arguments.
I'm probably not going to debate him again, at least for a while. I'm about to debate Olixa. I think you already had a discussion
Yeah. He could. By the time I was done with him, he conceded the entire proposition.
Oh, really?
So the way my debate with him went, yeah. So he put a proposition on the table. After I was done with the semantic analysis, it was pretty clear that the proposition was pretty silly. And he provided 11 different arguments to support the proposition. And I asked him, I basically went through like a kind of Socratic, kind of Bayesian analysis with each and every single one of them. And he conceded 7 out of 11 of the arguments that he brought up, and the only reason he didn't concede the last ones was because we ran out of time, and he sent me a private message afterward and said that he concedes the entire proposition. So, yeah, like
That's kind of funny.
the way you handle these people. I don't know if you're familiar with like a Bayesian inference or like Bayesian analysis or anything like that, but or Bayesian hypothesis testing or anything of the sort. But it's actually a pretty straightforward approach to deal with these types of people. Like, say they put a proposition on the table: red meat is healthy, and one of their supporting arguments is that we've consumed red meat for our evolutionary history. So basically that's presupposing that just because we've consumed something throughout our evolutionary history, it should be taken as some evidence that it's good for us. And maybe that's true. But the thing is, maybe that's not true. Maybe there are reasons to actually suspect that things that we've consumed throughout evolutionary history are actually more likely to be bad for us. Maybe there's an argument to be made there. And you can make an argument. You can make a very, very persuasive argument that things that we're adapted to consume are bad for us, or have a higher likelihood of being bad for us. So you just basically ask, okay, so the hypothesis is that red meat is healthy, and the evidence for the hypothesis is evolutionary history. Now, why is our evolutionary history more expected on the hypothesis than some negation of the hypothesis? Right? Like, maybe it's the case that because we evolved consuming it, that maybe it's unhealthy. And provided that you could come up with a plausible counter hypothesis, he would actually have to demonstrate that his hypothesis, that the evidence is more expected on his hypothesis than the counter hypothesis. And a lot of people just aren't prepared to do that, right? So they end up just getting screwed in debates like this because they're not prepared to actually demonstrate that one piece of evidence is more expected on the hypothesis than the negation of the hypothesis. And that's kind of like a Bayesian approach to debating these people. It's an approach that I've only taken a couple of times, but fuck is it successful when I've employed it. Like, it's so crazy just how well it works.
The Bayesian approach begins by specifying a prior distribution over parameters that must be estimated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to look into that a bit more, but
So basically, my approach to debating these people is to just employ Bayes' theorem. Just you have a hypothesis, and then the evidence for the hypothesis, and then you have to kind of do a probability calculation that demonstrates a higher likelihood of some piece of evidence either being in favor of the hypothesis versus being in favor of some negation of the hypothesis. And almost nobody is fucking prepared to do this. Fuck, I'm not even prepared to do this, but I'm not the one making positive claims in these debates, so it's not on me to actually demonstrate it. Coming up with probability figures for these types of things is excruciatingly difficult, if not impossible. But the thing is, if somebody's making the affirmation, if somebody's making the claim that the probability is higher for one than the other, then it is actually on them to provide the fucking numbers. Otherwise, they're just talking out of their ass. So, I think it's a highly effective approach when somebody's on the defensive in a debate, when they have to defend a particular claim that they've made. To take the Bayesian approach is really, really, really helpful. Let me see if I can find Bayes' theorem. Yeah, so this is basically it. Like this is the formalization of the question that I'm asking them. So the probability of the hypothesis given the evidence, divided by the probability of some negating hypothesis given the evidence, equals the probability of the evidence given the hypothesis divided by the probability of the evidence given the negation of the hypothesis, multiplied by the probability of the hypothesis over the probability of the negation of the hypothesis. Almost nobody who comes into a fucking empirical debate is able to actually fill in these blanks and actually provide a stable argument for their position.
Here's the positions
so
of
I think it's like
the
it's just
person
like
challenging me.
really powerful tool. A vegan diet is devoid of nutrients. Well, that's just a false claim. You don't even need to do any sort of analysis on that. That's just a false claim.
You could just ask for the definition of devoid.
Yeah, you could ask for a definition. Well, yeah, assuming that you have a shared understanding of what devoid means. Maybe devoid means that that the nutrients are at some trivial concentration,
or like,
and then you can get into the empirics.
You could take nutrients out and specify a certain thing, or
yeah. So like maybe by nutrients they just mean like vitamin B12 or something like that.
Or you could define
it's like, vegan diets are devoid of
like what is a vegan diet.
Yeah, and get them to specify like what a vegan diet even is. Like, what do they mean by vegan diet? What do you mean by devoid? And what specifically are you referring to when you say nutrients? Like, all three of those questions go a long way to exposing this as bullshit. Because that'd be biting the bullet on things like supplements not working, which it would be really, really, really stupid and a very silly position to take. Because a vegan diet can include fortified foods, even if we wanted to grant that all whole foods had no nutrients in them, which is just like silly. Actually, wait, you can go beyond this. Like, you just show that feeding a population sweet potatoes increases vitamin A status, and that would be sufficient to falsify the claim, assuming that we understand what the claim is actually, like what the claim actually is. I'm assuming what he means by vegan diet. I'm assuming what he means by devoid, and I'm assuming what he means by nutrients. But assuming that I understand what those mean, I think it would just be a false claim. Like, it just be straightforwardly false. So I don't think that one would be particularly difficult to grapple with. You could just dispatch it and dismiss it immediately. The second one, plants contain defense chemicals that are likely to cause harm. Well, he's using the word likely, which means that he has some kind of probability analysis that he's running, so he just needs to provide the argument. You know, so you'd be very sensitive to the language that people are using. So he's making a claim about probabilities. Well, okay, show the calculus, demonstrate it, and if you can't demonstrate it, then just tell him to fuck off. Like, just what the hell are you making the claim for if you actually can't demonstrate that it's the case?
Yeah, and then you'd have to define.
Also, it's like, what is
defense chemical?
Like defense chemicals, yeah. You'd have to do semantic analysis on every word that there could be ambiguity about. So, like, if a defense chemical is just like, I don't know, phytate, well, okay, not every plant food has phytate. If it's lectins, okay, not every fucking plant food has lectins. Like, so it would just be like a conditional statement, just basically relegated to certain domains of plant foods rather than just plant foods simpliciter. So containing defense chemicals, hey, maybe that's you could do the Bayesian analysis on this too. Like, say the claim is, oh, they contain these defense chemicals and that's why they're bad for us. Well, it's okay. So the hypothesis is plants are bad for us. The evidence for that hypothesis is the defense chemicals. How is that more expected on the hypothesis than some negation of the hypothesis? Maybe those defense chemicals are actually good for us. Maybe because those defense chemicals are primarily used to dissuade insects from consumption, maybe they just have different effects on human physiology. Maybe they have beneficial effects on human physiology. So how is it more expected that those defense chemicals are there on that hypothesis rather than the negation of some hypothesis? And if they can't provide you the probability calculus, then you just tell them to concede. And if they don't concede, you just fucking leave because nothing motivates them. Like, I don't know. There are tons of really juicy ways to handle sophistry like this. Okay, so the third prop is meat is necessary for human health. Okay, so what does it mean? What is meant by necessary? So, and also, what is meant by meat? Like, does shrimp count as meat? Do oysters count as meat? So, like, what about like you just need clarification on what meat means. Clarification on what necessary means. Like, if something's necessary, I take that to mean that there's some there's some impossibility that's entailed for the opposite being true. So it's necessary for human health. So that means that it's impossible to get human health, whatever that means, without meat. And if that's true, he just needs to provide the argument. So what is the argument that health is impossible in the absence of meat? Right? Like, what is the argument for that?
Right. So it would be,
if he's trying to demonstrate some kind of impossibility, the argument that he would have to provide would be showing that there's some kind of contradiction entailed. And if he can't provide that argument, then his claim's just false.
it would have to be the case that all non-vegans were healthier than all vegans.
Well, he just needs to provide an argument that it's necessarily the case that meat is that like, well, it's actually difficult to understand. It's difficult to appraise exactly what's being said right here because we don't have the definitions. Like, what is necessary? What is human health? Like, what do you mean by human health? If human health just cashes out into you feel good, well, that's just going to be a false claim because tons of vegans feel good. If human health means increasing the lag time to an illness, that's also going to be a false claim because vegans have some of the longest lag times to illness. So either way, that depending on how that gets cashed out, I mean, it's going to end up being a false claim. But there are a few ways they could be cashed out where it doesn't end up being a false claim. Like if somebody says their definition of health is something that makes me feel good. So like, and somebody can't feel good without meat. Say this person can't feel good without meat, and what they mean by healthy is it makes me feel good without meat. Then that's just a trivially true statement, right? Like, meat is necessary to make me feel good. Well, okay, I don't deny that. That's fine. Whatever. Yeah. I don't care. Like, you know, you could just grant that and you don't even need to have a debate.
Just a question about something you just said. The vegans have the longest lag time to disease, was it?
Yeah. Well, that's what I would glean. Well, not the longest lag time, but some of the longest lag times.
How do you measure that kind of thing? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so like just differences in the relative risk compared to different dietary patterns. Vegan diets usually come out being pretty good in terms of relative risk reductions for a number of different diseases. And from there, you're just inferring that you're delaying the lag time to some disease because fewer people who ate those diets actually ended up getting disease outcomes. So on average, you're just increasing, you'd be just looking at an increase in the lag time to disease. So if the relative risk is of cardiovascular disease, for example, is lower, like if a vegan diet lowers the relative risk of cardiovascular disease compared to some non-vegan diet, you can say that vegan diet is prolonging the onset of illness. You can say that it's increasing the lag time to disease because the relative risk is lower. More people stayed healthier longer than on the comparator. It's just like a trivial statement that you can make about it. But to be clear, like I don't think veganism like outright wins. Like I think there's tons of dietary patterns that are non-inferior to one another. Like you take a quintessential kind of vegan diet. I think it's largely going to produce similar outcomes to a Mediterranean diet, a DASH diet, a vegetarian diet, or a pescatarian diet. Like I actually think that they are all pretty like equivalent, like not inferior to one another. I don't think there's anything magical about vegan diets in particular.
Well, no, there's so many subcategories.
But-
Like a whole food vegan diet is healthier than quote unquote a vegan diet, and then you could probably
if your vegan diet is like nothing but if the vegan diet's like nothing but Oreos and Pepsi, then I would consider the whole foods vegan diet to be better, provided it was supplementing B12.
like you might not even see.
But I think in health conscious populations that aren't eating like the Oreo cookie vegan diets, like you generally see that their health outcomes are about the same as people who are consuming health conscious vegetarian diets and health conscious pescatarian diets, and the relative risk reductions are about the same as what you'd expect from like a Mediterranean or DASH diet. So I just make the inference that from the larger body of literature from overall, that vegan diets are roughly in the same ballpark as all those other diets, regardless of whether or not they include or exclude animal foods. Like there are plenty of healthy permutations. There are plenty of permutations of a healthy diet, and a vegan diet, like a health conscious vegan diet, is just kind of like one of them. It's just one flavor that you could choose.
Yeah. Well, I think all my questions are answered. I really appreciate you having the chat.
Dude, I am always down for this. Unless I'm like at the park with my kid or something, like I am always down for these chats, because dunking on sophists is my job, and like this is literally what I do for a living, is having conversations like this with people and producing content and stuff like that. So like I'm always down to, I'm not recording this or anything like that, but I'm always down to have these conversations, because I get like a particular thrill out of fucking goofballs on the internet getting absolutely dunked on.
I am recording this, and I
yeah.
recorded our last conversation. Not published, of course, just for my own,
for sure.
own purposes. I could publish it, but
Dude, you have my full permission to publish anything that I say in this Discord server.
yeah, I might. I'll think about
And
it.
if anybody has any issues with it, they know where to find me.
You have a kid?
Yeah.
I have a 15, 16-month-old boy.
Sweet.
Vegan from
my
birth.
kid's 10.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, my kid doesn't live with me, and her mother's not vegan. I mean, if she did live with me, she'd be vegan, to the extent that she'd be vegan if she lived with me. I think I probably have a different definition of veganism than you, or perhaps maybe not. I take a sentientist definition of veganism. So like my kid, I would be okay with my kid eating like oysters and bivalves and scallops and maybe some species of shrimp and stuff like that. I think I'd be perfectly okay with that.
I actually eat honey, so I need to debate someone on honey.
Yeah,
see if I can get moved, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have a strong view on honey. Like I think it depends on the procurement method, because there are certain methods that it's not clear that it entails any rights violations, in my view.
Yeah, I'd be making the flow hive though argument.
Yeah.
Essentially not disturbing the bee colony.
Yeah, the best argument that I've heard against it is like some people, depending on the honey production method, smoke is used to kind of move the bees around, and some bees actually get harmed by the smoke. And I would consider that a rights violation. So there are certain methods of procuring honey that I think I would have an issue with. But yeah, like I don't have a problem with people like eating oysters. Like vegans get really triggered by this. Like I put like on Twitter the other day, like a picture of like oyster salad on toast, and I was like, who said you can't get zinc on a vegan diet? And just being cheeky, trying to like get people to like roast me or whatever. And it triggered two debates with people that I had on a Twitter space, and neither one of them could defend their arguments that oysters weren't vegan. Because the reductio there is that tumor lives matters. Like tumor lives matter. Because like usually they'll say things like, oh, like the cerebral ganglia in the oysters is like, that could be like some kind of primitive brain that could hold some kind of consciousness. And it's like, well, okay, there are certain types of neuronal tumors that are way more complex than anything that you could find inside of a bivalve. I mean, if you had a benign tumor, would you be against excising it on the basis of the precautionary principle because it might be sentient? And if the answer is yes, then I just laugh. And if the answer is no, then it's like, well, okay then. I mean, I don't see why you're against bivalve consumption then.
Is there a health...
I've gone a step further with some people too.
Is there a health argument to be made against bivalves?
Oh, yeah. They're like full of fucking toxins and heavy metals. But they taste awesome, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you successfully argue that it's vegan to consume it, then I suppose that it just becomes a discretionary health risk at that point.
Yeah, it just becomes like a question about, it's kind of just like alcohol, right? Like, yeah, alcohol is not healthy, but like tons of people consume it for their own pleasure. And I don't really have a problem with people consuming things for their own pleasure, even if they are like risky. There are certain types of bivalves that aren't risky, though. Like scallops aren't risky.
I'd probably agree with your definition of veganism then. I ate.
Okay, cool.
I ate mussels for my first year, and I just kind of stopped because I, didn't really feel like it. But it is what it is.
No, that's good to hear. I mean, because I personally think that the sentientist definition of veganism is the most like kind of it's the least hilarious view out of all of them, right? Like there's some views of veganism that just lead to hilarity. Like something along the lines of like, anything that belongs to the kingdom of Animalia is off limits to eat. And that would extend to things like brainless cows. Like say we genetically engineered brainless cows that didn't even have a conscious experience. Like eating those cows, you're going to tell me that eating those cows is wrong somehow? And it's like, on what basis would that be wrong? It's like, it belongs to the kingdom of Animalia. It's like, well, wait, that just seems like dogma. Like what is it that you value about those things from the kingdom of Animalia? It's like, they suffer. Well, hey, this cow doesn't suffer. It doesn't have a brain. So it's like, what?
Well,
like, I just think that view of veganism leads to the least hilarity.
Say for example, you went over the relevant information with regards to bivalves' ecological value, and then it could be shown that the bivalves that you were eating was negatively impacting the ecosystem. There could probably be an ethical argument to be made.
Yeah, there might be an ethical argument to be made if it could be demonstrated. I think that, like, most bivalves are farmed, and it's not clear to me that the farming is actually a net negative instead of a net benefit, because these animals are like literally siphoning impurities out of the water, and in a lot of cases they're like siphoning like microplastics and stuff that we actually don't want in the water. Now, of course, when you eat them, you're eating those things too, and that's fine. You could eat them or not eat them, but the presence of what you can't argue against is that the presence of those oyster farms seem to be beneficial for the ecosystem at large, because they're filter feeders. Like, you're literally just adding more filter feeders to the environment, and I don't know what the argument against that would be, personally. But maybe somebody could persuade me on some kind of environmental thing, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I grew up in New Zealand, so I know a lot of people who would go diving for oysters and mussels and stuff. So that would be different to farmed.
Yeah.
It'd be quite a nuanced argument if you were really going to debate whether or not it's ethical.
Yeah, and the empirical burden on the person that wants to claim ecological damage, the empirical burden I think on them is actually pretty high, because like you'd have to, if they want to just speculate about more animals dying or more utility lost, it's kind of like a crop deaths argument. Like it's like, oh, look at all these animals that are dying for the crop production or whatever, so it's like the crops aren't justified. It's like, well, what's the argument that there's more or less animal death as opposed to wild land? I mean, there's probably more animal death on the wild land. Like, what the hell's the argument for the crop deaths being a utility drain? If anything, it's a utility gain if the alternative is wild land, right? So it's similar for the bivalve farming situation. It's like, well, what's the argument that the utility would be lower or the utility would be higher without the oyster farms? Like, it's the empirical burden is just astronomical. But maybe somebody could do it. Maybe somebody could provide me with like a really clear analysis that says like, oh yeah, it's like having wild land as opposed to oyster farms, or having a wild ocean ecosystem as opposed to oyster farms is just better.
It's really weird to me. I feel like I often get ascribed the position that like I support monocropping, or for example, someone said to me recently, like, well, what's your solution to an affordable fence for my property so that I can't shoot animals and the fence will keep them out? Like, it's like, whoa, like that sounds like a you problem, buddy.
Like, so yeah, you could put up a fence if you want to. It might be better to put up a fence, but
he's saying the vegan
in the
position
absence of a fence, I think
would cause his fence cost to be too high.
Well, that's just nonsense.
It's like
what's like it in that case, like, what's the vegan position? He needs to like unpack what he means by that. If he thinks that veganism commits vegans to being against all form of animal death, he's just confused.
Yeah, like I wouldn't.
He's just confused.
I wouldn't even necessarily say it's wrong to kill a human if that human was relentlessly trying to destroy your crops.
Yeah, you just argue it in the human case. Like, say you had like millions and millions of like retarded humans that were like trying to eat your corn, and your corn was like pivotal in the survival of some huge community of humans. And these retarded humans just were completely fucking unrelenting, and the only thing that you could do to keep them away was kill them. There was no practical way to separate them from your fucking community-saving corn. Yeah, kill them. Like, because I literally think that the interests of the community supersede the interests of those animals. So I don't see a contradiction there. I don't see an inconsistency there. I don't see a rights violation there, because we would tolerate it in the human case as well if the traits were equalized. I mean, we would tolerate it with humans. I don't know why we wouldn't tolerate it with animals. And hey, man, if you need to keep a deer out of your cornfield and you need to shoot the goddamn thing, fucking eat the damn thing if you want. Like, I don't care. I don't think it entails a rights violation. Now, if you want to breed them into existence and then bolt gun them in the head and fucking eat their corpses, I mean, like, I think that's entirely different. I think that is a rights violation. It just depends on the particulars.
Yeah, for sure. Like, for instance, in New Zealand, the government issues, I can't remember if it's like a bounty or reward or just like the statement that like it is, we want you to go out and kill deer, or we want you to go out and kill possums. And so there's tons of people making a career.
Similar things in Australia.
Yeah, kangaroos maybe.
Well, if there's a strong ecological argument to be made for going out and killing, I don't know, I'd have to give it some thought. Like, if there was a strong reason to do it where you could demonstrate like some utility drain, or you could demonstrate some rights violations, greater rights violations would incur if you didn't go out and shoot deer. I don't know, maybe I'd be okay with that. like, as it stands, I'm already okay with going out and killing certain types of predators. Like, if somebody wants to go bear hunting, I actually don't have an issue with that. I think that's probably a moral good.
Yeah, probably. It's just weird how people jump straight to these points when it's like a vegan debate. It's like, oh well, so you're telling me I can't shoot a fox on my land or something? You know, it's like, well, not really.
It's like, well, no. I mean, like, to the extent that it's necessary to protect your home and protect, like, the people on the property, or maybe your pets or something like that. Like, if there's going to be some kind of, like, damage that ensues, or there's going to be some kind of, like, loss of life, or there's, like, a loss of safety, no, you have the right to defend yourself against assailants. Not going to take that from you. You have a right to defend your property. You have a right to defend your loved ones. If a fox comes onto your property and is contesting your safety, or challenging your safety, and the only practical way you have to remove it is shoot the fucker. Yeah, shoot the fucker.
Yeah. Okay, man. Well, I hope to talk to you
A lot
again.
of people, yeah, for sure. Anytime, man. Anytime. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, sweet. All right. I'm gonna dig into those resources that you provided, and
Yeah, for sure, man. Enjoy.
should be good. Yeah, thanks heaps. I'm gonna jump off.
Yeah, no problem, man. Yeah, I'll catch you later.
Peace.
See ya. Bye.